They were two single parents sharing one common bond.
When they met, it was perfect timing. They were both working towards a goal.
She was smitten. He swept her off of her feet.
But when gunshots pierce the early morning stillness, their romance is swept into turmoil.
Somebody just got shot in the head out here. Oh my God, holy.
She had one gunshot to her left cheek, one behind her ear, and then another in her forehead. It seemed like overkill.
The homicide investigation will prove that sometimes evil hides in plain sight.
The entire murder was caught on tape.
Police believe she may have been targeted by one of her passengers.
Next thing I know, he gets in the car, gets into the vehicle. It says what? Drive.
Detectives learn that what initially seems like a job-related fatality is anything but.
I'm noticing that she's uploading inappropriate pictures.
That's like a pretty explicit photo.
Yes, very explicit.
This murder was fueled with anger and rage and distress. She's standing next to a white SUV that matches the exact description of the getaway vehicle.
This is a classic case of fatal attraction.
When you hear, "Baby, I love you to death," be wary, because they just might.
October 28, 2020, Baytown, Texas. It's a quiet night in this quaint Houston suburb.
What people love about Baytown is the community is very close-knit. A lot of people know each other.
It's oil workers. It's everything somebody would think of as far as hardworking, good old USA.
By 5 a.m., one hardworking Baytown resident, Brenda Summers, is up and ready to start the day, but it will soon be hurled into chaos.
Brenda was getting ready for work, and all of a sudden she hears a loud noise resembling a gunshot. When she looked out her window, she witnessed a person being shot in their car.
Oh my God.
She immediately called 911.
911 says it's an emergency. Somebody just got shot in the head out here. Oh my God, he's shot right square in the head. Holy. Stay on the phone with me, okay? We're gonna get someone out there.
Within minutes, Baytown police arrive at the apartment complex where Brenda lives on the north side of town.
They're looking at the victim inside the vehicle, consistent with what was reported on 911. Her foot is on the brake. The brake lights are still on. The engine is still running.
It's obvious to them that this person has been shot multiple times.
Police quickly realize they're too late to render first aid.
Unfortunately, there was no pulse. She was already dead.
The first things that homicide detectives want to know at a murder scene is who is their victim.
Obviously, they're trying to figure out some identification, and they look down and they see that the deceased woman has a fanny pack.
When they look inside, they discover a Texas license.
The victim is 31-year-old Jasmine Garrett.
Once you know as a homicide detective who your victim is, you can start conducting what's called the psychological autopsy. Who is this? This is not just a body in front of us. This is a person.
Born and raised in Indiana, Jasmine Garrett always had an affinity for the arts.
Jasmine had such a creative mind. It didn't matter if it was arts, writing, that's how she expressed herself.
She loved to read, she loved to paint, and people gravitated towards her because of that free spirit.
Jasmine's the type of person that dreams big and has a big heart. Some people may say a hopeless romantic.
Jasmine was eager to see what the world outside her Indiana hometown had to offer.
She made a huge decision to move to a big city, and that city was Houston, Texas.
Growing up in a small town, the lure of the big city can seem very enticing.
And shortly after moving to Houston, Jasmine found love with a man named Calvin Ray.
Calvin was another free spirit just like Jasmine, and they really connected over their love of adventure.
But in 2018, the couple got some unexpected news that would change their life forever. Jasmine was pregnant with twins.
One newborn is a lot, but two are overwhelming. So Calvin and Jasmine really struggled to stay afloat.
And things became even more challenging when Jasmine lost the help of her partner.
Jasmine's boyfriend and the father of her two twins got into some legal trouble, unfortunately, and was sent to jail.
Jasmine was already facing the challenges that come with being a new mother, but now her partner has become locked up.
She really needed some help.
So Jasmine reluctantly sent the twins to live with family members in Indiana, while she worked to create a stable environment for them in Houston.
She was making decisions that would help benefit them in the long run.
Jasmine was on her grind. Her main focus was affording an apartment and getting her children back.
She's working 12-hour days as a driver with rideshare companies to save up money so she can get an apartment of her own and have a place where her children can come to.
The last thing on Jasmine's mind was finding romance. But one night on the job, romance found her.
She picks up a handsome passenger named Robert Roberts.
Robert?
Yeah, Jasmine?
That's me.
Okay. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you? How's the night?
It's better now.
She was smitten. He was congenial. He was funny. He swept her off of her feet.
He had a personality that was outgoing and fun.
Actually, you mind if I move up front?
Oh, no problem. Go for it.
All right.
Like Jasmine, Robert was a single parent, working hard to provide for his kids.
These two right here is yours?
Yeah, those are my babies.
I actually, I got two of my own. That's them right there.
Robert is a young father taking care of his children. And that said to Jasmine that he's a provider, he's a protector.
Before long, the two were inseparable.
They were so wooed by one another. They had already started planning to create this life with one another.
They ended up leaning on each other. They became each other's person.
So how did Jasmine end up shot to death in the Houston suburb of Baytown?
She had one gunshot to her left cheek, one behind her ear, and then another in her forehead. It seemed like overkill.
Homicide detectives look for things that are out of the ordinary, disorganized. What is it about this scene that is telling this story?
They see a sign on her dashboard that indicates she's a car share driver.
Which provides investigators with their first lead.
Was Jasmine picking someone up at this apartment complex?
Police believe she may have been targeted by one of her passengers.
In October of 2020, single mom Jasmine Garrett was on the grind.
She gets with a rideshare company, starts making money that way.
Jasmine was working 12 hours a day so that she could save enough money to get her own apartment, get her children back.
Jasmine was determined. She was going to make something of her life.
And when she picked up a charming passenger, Robert Roberts, she thought she'd found a kindred spirit.
The two of them were forging a very tight relationship, providing each other the support that they needed in order to be successful.
But now Jasmine has been found shot to death at an apartment complex in the Houston suburb of Baytown.
Crimes such as this you really don't see very often in Baytown, Texas. They are trying to figure out what in the world just happened.
Investigators immediately notice that her rideshare sign is lit up.
They also noticed that her cell phone was missing. And so the police ascertained that this could have been a robbery by one of her potential passengers. There was stippling present on the gunshot wounds, which means she was shot at very close range.
It is clear that this person didn't just fire a weapon at Jasmine. They were right on her. They were perhaps within inches of her head when they fired this gun.
These shots were all intentional, close range, and that tells us that the gunman was not taking any chances of Jasmine surviving. He wanted to make sure this person was dead.
Inside Jasmine's car and on the ground around it, investigators locate 3 .40 caliber shell casings.
So now, you know that Jasmine was shot with a .40 caliber pistol.
The casings were bagged as evidence and sent off for ballistic testing. Police hope they'll eventually be able to match them to a murder weapon.
Investigators also collect a parking pass hanging from Jasmine's rearview mirror.
It looks similar to parking passes hanging in other surrounding vehicles.
Detectives take that parking pass with the intentions of providing it to the apartment staff to see if they can verify if she is a tenant.
But first, they want to speak to their eyewitness, the woman who called 911, Brenda Summers.
At this point, she's the only one who saw what happened.
Miss Summers, can you tell us everything that you remember?
Of course. I was getting ready for work.
Brenda reiterates what she told dispatch on the 911 call, that around 5 a.m., she heard 2 loud bangs outside her apartment.
Brenda says that as she looks outside, she can see a man standing outside the driver's door of Jasmine's car.
She describes the killer as being a black male, about 5'9", wearing a white t-shirt and a red beanie hat.
He's also wearing a white medical mask.
I saw him shoot her square in the forehead, and then he ran.
She says he ran off to a wooded area, and that's when she called 911.
Oh my God, he shot right square in the head. Holy.
Do you recognize either of them from the apartment complex?
No, never saw them before.
Although Ms. Summers' description of the assailant is helpful, the detectives know they need more.
Thank you for your time, Miss Summers.
So they immediately go to the leasing office to speak with the manager to inquire as to whether or not the apartment complex has surveillance videos.
Can you pull up the footage around 4 a.m.?
Yes. The apartment complex has great security footage, and so they sit down and they begin to watch what unfolded.
At 4 a.m., detectives see a man matching the description given by Brenda Summers enter the apartment complex.
He's just lurking in the shadows, back and forth in front of this one particular apartment building.
Then at 4:52, detectives can see Jasmine exit one of the apartment buildings and walk directly towards her car in the parking lot.
The suspect hangs back a little bit. He waits until after she gets into her car before he approaches her vehicle.
They engage in what appears to be a heated discussion for several minutes.
And detectives already know what happens next.
The masked man fires into the car 3 times.
Jasmine's entire murder was caught on tape.
But in reviewing more of the surveillance footage, detectives noticed that the killer didn't run into the nearby woods like Brenda Summers thought.
After shooting Jasmine, he ran back to a white SUV, and the vehicle speeds immediately out of the apartment complex.
Who's driving the SUV?
Within hours of Jasmine Garrett's murder, police have discovered surveillance footage that shows the entire shooting go down. But several questions still remain.
Who is the masked man who shot her? And who is driving the white SUV that drove him from the scene?
When they roll back the footage, detectives see the white SUV arriving at the apartment complex just after 4 a.m.
So they're pretty confident the killer wasn't a resident of the apartment complex or someone Jasmine was picking up a part of a rideshare.
This murder was not a random robbery. Whoever killed Jasmine had her as a personal target.
This killing was planned and premeditated.
Unfortunately, though, detectives can't make out the getaway vehicle's license plate.
Can you zoom in more than that?
Unfortunately not.
Investigators are very frustrated during this time. It's almost too good to be true. It's not every day that a murder takes place that you can see it on footage, but you're missing so much information.
In hopes of trying to get more information about that white SUV, detectives assemble a group of foot patrol officers to kind of canvass the area.
Okay, let me know as soon as you find anything.
With that search underway, detectives have more questions for the manager of the apartment complex.
Detectives were not sure as to why Jasmine was in the apartment complex in the first place. They didn't know whether or not she was there to drop off or pick up a passenger, or if she actually lived there and was about to start work that morning.
Now, after looking at the surveillance video and seeing Jasmine exit one of the apartments, their belief is she possibly lived there.
Found this in the car.
Investigators hand over to the staff the parking pass that was found in Jasmine's car.
That's one of my passes.
However, it's not a resident parking pass.
The apartment management said, that's a visitor pass. That's not what the residents have.
Do you have records of tenants and visitors?
Yeah, let me look.
They were able to track down who provided that visitor pass.
The pass is linked to an apartment being leased by a man named Joel Pratt.
They make contact with Joel and bring him into the station for an official interview.
Listen, appreciate you coming in. I'm sorry we have to meet like this, all right? But we do need to sit down and see if we can help us out. We'll sort of go over everything again, all right? So, what do you know her as? What's her name? What do you call her?
Jasmine.
Jazzy?
Mm-hmm. Her name is Jasmine Gear.
Joel says he and Jasmine became fast friends after she moved to the Houston area in 2016.
It was completely platonic. Joel is a gay man.
And when money got tight for Jasmine after the birth of her twins and their father's incarceration, Joel was there to help.
She asked Joel if she could crash on his couch for a while, and he agreed. Joel provided that safety net for her as she was getting her finances back on track. He gave her a place to stay.
You talk to her throughout the day of your stay, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that common? Y'all talk, text, phone call, whatever?
Talk, text.
While she's out working. Everything seems to be fine?
Mm-hmm.
Joel remembers the evening before that Jasmine had come home pretty late, and she appeared to be really tired from working a 12-hour shift.
Hey.
Tired.
Long day, huh?
Very long day.
And they spoke for a little while, telling him about their day.
And then she crashed on the couch.
She seemed perfectly fine.
She was tired.
Didn't indicate any issues going on that day. Or just seemed like a normal driving around doing her business day.
It was just like a real big problem or something like this. She would have let me know.
The detectives have no reason to doubt Joel's story, and he doesn't appear to resemble the shooter in the surveillance footage.
They can easily rule him out as the person who killed Jasmine.
But they have to wonder, does he have any idea who did?
They ask him if he knows anybody who would want to harm Jasmine Garrett.
To detectives' surprise, Joel has an answer right away.
Joel tells detectives that she had been involved in an on and off again relationship.
They had the problems. They were going through it and everything like that. She would tell me about it. She would tell me everything, but she told me about it.
Who's this guy?
Albert Roberts?
He goes on to tell detectives that while he's never met Robert, the stories Jasmine shared were concerning.
Like, she was just like, she was throwing stuff and she's like, she was scared.
Texas police investigating the homicide of Jasmine Garrett have discovered she was living with a friend named Joel Pratt at the time of her murder. Now in an interview room, Joel has named a possible suspect.
Apparently, Jasmine was in an on and off again tumultuous relationship.
Who was this guy? Albert Roberts?
Joel never actually met Robert Roberts in person. He had only heard about Robert from the stories that Jasmine told him, and those stories were pretty horrific.
Him and her had some problems earlier this year, and they got into an argument.
Joel told detectives this one, just bizarre story involving Robert and Jasmine.
She had to go up to her parents, or up in Indiana. Okay. They have kids.
Joel tells detectives that the last time Jasmine went to Indiana to visit her family, Robert went with her.
They were already having problems, but they were on their off. He didn't want nobody else on with her, so he went with her.
Robert had this desire that he had to control her. He had to control every aspect of her life.
On the drive back, Jasmine pulled over to get gas in Little Rock, Arkansas, when a stranger walked up behind her.
Jasmine was inappropriately approached by a man.
Or some dude had touched her or something, rubbed her finger up her back, and then she turned around and started thinking it was the guy that she was with. The dude told her, "I'm sorry, I just wanted to see your face," and she told him, "You don't need to touch people like that."
Robert sees this, but instead of running to her aid, he actually assaults her.
Hey! What the hell you doing talking to another man, huh? To me, Robert.
He slapped her upside the head and told her, "Like her?" Yes, hit her upside the head and told her, "Don't talk to anybody else." Then he got tussling.
Now, you think he would grab the man, this stranger? No. He attacked Jasmine, slapped her right there, right in front of everyone.
Good luck on your own.
Joel says Robert took off in the car, abandoning Jasmine at the gas station.
He takes off in her vehicle?
No, it was a rental at the time.
Whatever rental.
Left her there at the store.
She was left with no money and no means to get back. She really had to try to figure things out.
She ended up calling Joel.
Joel, I need your help.
Joel Pratt is able to drive to Little Rock, Arkansas, and pick her up.
Jazzy, let me see. Jazzy, this is crazy.
I know. I'm so done with him. I swear I'm done after this.
But Robert wasn't done terrorizing Jasmine.
What is it?
Oh my God.
Roberts has hacked into her social media accounts and has began to post sexually explicit pictures of her.
Like very explicit photos?
Yes, very explicit. Jasmine does not upload pictures like that. These were inappropriate pictures. Like real inappropriate. One of those things that get you blocked off Facebook like in an instant.
I'm so sorry, Jay. Look, let's just go home and we'll take care of that later, okay?
Okay, it's so embarrassing.
Joel says when they got back to Houston, Jasmine took legal action against Robert.
She made a report about that in Houston?
Yeah, she made a report. She had a big knot right here and it had stitches in it, and then she had a stitch on her lips. She looked like a fish for like 3 days.
The domestic violence case against Robert was still pending, but Jasmine was relieved to have him out of her life.
However, Jasmine's relief was short-lived.
It was a short period where she had begun to relax. But then one day, Joel says that he came home and he found Jasmine frantically packing her bags.
I walked around the corner and said, "Hey, Jazzy, you all right?" She thought I gotta get out of here. What happened?
I gotta go. It's not safe for me here anymore.
She saw Robert and he had a gun.
She walked up the walkway and he came around the corner and put a gun in her face. Told him next time we see you, he's gonna kill her.
She say why? What was the issue?
So the guy was angry.
Better watch your back. Your days are numbered.
Thank you for everything.
You don't have to leave. You'll be safe here. Please don't go.
Jasmine was so scared that she moved out of Joel's apartment and started staying in motels.
Unfortunately, Jasmine could not keep up the financial commitment that it took to stay in different hotel rooms every night. So eventually, she leaned on her friend Joel again and moved back in with him.
Moved all her stuff out of there, and she came to stay with me.
She moved back in with Joel about a week prior to the shooting.
The investigators are stunned by everything they're hearing. And if it's true, they agree that Robert is their #1 suspect in this crime.
Anything else you can think of? Here's my card with my information on it. All right. What I want you to do when I get you back there, I want you to see what you can find out of this cat. Okay?
When detectives run Robert's name into their database, they discover that Jasmine had indeed filed police reports against Robert for attacking her.
Robert also looks eerily similar to the man from the surveillance footage.
Detectives are eager to speak with Robert Roberts, but locating him is no easy task.
He's not answering phone calls. He's not showing up to any of the previous addresses that police have on file for him.
As officers continue patrolling the area for Robert, detectives do some additional digging on the white SUV that served as Robert's getaway vehicle on the morning of the crime.
They determined it's unlikely that the vehicle belonged to Robert.
When reviewing the DMV records, they noticed that he drives a black sedan and not a white SUV as seen in the surveillance video.
They're digging around looking for any sign of that white SUV.
And when investigators dig into Robert's social media page, they find just what they're looking for.
The detectives find a profile picture of one of Robert's friends standing next to a white SUV that matches the exact description of the getaway vehicle.
The woman's name is Candace Oliver.
How was she involved in this? Did she want Robert all to herself?
She could help block this whole thing.
With a history of abuse exposed, Jasmine Garrett's ex-boyfriend, Robert Roberts, has become the prime suspect in her homicide investigation. But police believe he had a willing accomplice.
Someone driving a white SUV was Robert's getaway driver on the morning of the crime.
They were able to find the identity of the person who owns the white SUV. Her name is Candace Oliver.
Investigators are having difficulties tracking down Robert. So in the meantime, they shift their focus to Candace.
Police bring Candace back to the Baytown police station for questioning.
They immediately press her about her relationship with Robert Roberts.
I met him through a friend though, y'all. This was years ago. I guess he kept coming around, you know?
Candace shared with detectives that, yeah, she knew Robert Roberts and that they used to date on and off, but now their relationship kind of grew more to a platonic relationship, more of a brother-sister type relationship.
Detectives ask Candace about the last time she saw Robert. She tells them it was on October 28th, the same night of Jasmine's murder.
So October 28th, which was a Wednesday, shows up at your house, correct?
Right.
You remember about what time it was around?
It was about 2 something.
So maybe 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
What are you doing here?
Look, I need you to do me a favor.
Robert asks her, I need you to drive me somewhere.
Oh, Robert, it's 2 a.m.
Please.
So he never called you ahead of time, text you, message you, anything about, hey, what's going on? And can I come out? I want to come out or anything like that. Nothing like that. Just showed up.
Yes. It was really shocking because I haven't seen him for a minute. And he was like, yeah, take me somewhere. I was like, where can I take you?
You owe me after this. Where are we going?
I'll explain to you on the way. But come on, you gotta hurry.
You asked him, where do you want me to take? What do you tell you?
He said, just drive.
Once in the car, Candace says Robert began directing her towards Baytown.
It was a quiet ride.
Did he tell you where to go?
No, he just said, go here.
So what do you mean, go here? Did he give you like a location to drive to? You put in your phone like directions? Or did he say, go here, here, and here?
He just said, here and up.
Candace told detectives that she continuously asked Robert, what's going on, where are we going, why are we going, but Robert refused to tell her and just only simply stated, just keep driving.
You're not even asking him, well, we going out here, who you to see?
I kept asking him that the whole time. He was not trying to give me any answers.
The drive from Spring to Baytown, or really the west end of Houston to the far east end of Houston, can take anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour. It's a long time to be in a car with somebody and not know your destination.
Candace says they eventually arrived at a Baytown apartment complex.
I just parked. I cut my car off. And I just sat in the car.
And what did he do while he's there?
He got out the car.
Candace says she never saw Robert with the gun.
He gets out. He's got nothing with him.
No.
In other words, he's not carrying anything.
That's what I'm kind of shocked.
Gets out and starts walking around. Or walks away from the vehicle.
Right.
Okay.
And it was so dark I didn't see him anymore.
When detectives asked Candace what it is she thought Robert was there to do, she says she's unsure, but figures he was there to see another woman.
He probably got women all over, you know what I mean? It ain't no man you want this. My mama always say anything that's open at 12 and above is nothing but legs. I'm a woman, so in the back of my mind, what woman you want to see now?
Candace does tell detectives that in the past, Robert had mentioned a young lady by the name of Jazz, but that she had never met her personally. After waiting for about 10 or 15 minutes, Candace began to call Robert to inquire as to what's going on.
I had called and said, what's going on? It's time to go. What are you doing? You know what I mean?
What does he say?
He hung up the phone.
About 30 minutes later, Robert finally returned.
Okay. When he got back to the vehicle, was he just walking, running, jogging?
He was walking.
He's walking. Everything seemed normal.
Yes.
She says he didn't seem nervous or suspicious at all.
Next time he gets in the car, we leave.
Gets into the vehicle. He says what?
Drive.
Candace says he didn't say anything about who he came to see or what he was there to do.
Candace tells detectives that she never saw Robert with the gun, nor did she hear any gunshots while she was waiting for him to come back to the vehicle.
Her story is certainly suspicious. It's possible that she knows more about what happened than she's letting on.
In an attempt to encourage Candace to be more forthcoming, they decide to show her the crime scene photos from Jasmine's murder.
This is what we're working. That's what he did. That's what he did. That's why we're at this point right now. That's Jazz.
Guess who drove him to the crime scene? And drove him away from a crime scene? Exactly. Guess who's involved in it? Yes, ma'am.
Despite her loyalty to Robert, she agrees to go on record that the man in the footage is Robert Roberts.
This is him.
That looks like him, yeah.
But where is Robert now?
They have their case. They just don't have him.
Police in Baytown, Texas finally have enough to arrest Robert Roberts for the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Jasmine Garrett. His reluctant getaway driver, Candace Oliver, has positively identified him as the shooter in surveillance footage.
This is him.
That looks like him, yeah.
While the evidence seems to be ironclad and squarely pointing at Robert as the shooter, there's one issue. They still don't know where Robert is.
Candace said she hadn't heard from him since the night in question.
They have him at the location. They have him in the vehicle. They have him captured on tape. They have their case. They just don't have him.
Weeks go by without any sign of Robert until April 13th, 2021.
Baytown police get a tip that Robert is hiding out over 300 miles away in New Orleans. With the help of New Orleans police, they're able to arrest him without incident and extradite him back to Texas.
They're hoping that they're going to get a confession out of him.
Mr. Roberts, I'm Detective Zukas, Detective Gonzalez, Baytown Police Department. Let's sit down and speak with you for a minute.
But Robert refuses to give a statement, let alone a confession.
Robert asserts his right to have a lawyer present, effectively terminating the interview.
I'll talk to you guys when I have my lawyer for you. Anything you want to know when I have no lawyer. Okay. So you don't want to talk to you locate or speak with your attorney, correct? My name, buddy.
Regardless, investigators have what they need to charge Robert with first-degree murder.
They don't have Robert's confession. They don't need it. They're convinced that they have enough evidence and enough information to convict Robert Roberts of this horrible murder.
And when his trial begins in September 2023, prosecutors present their theory.
They have the story to tell of Jasmine and Robert. Started off as two people who leaned on each other, who cared about each other, but also a story of rage and envy, a story of domestic violence, a story of abuse.
The next time I see you, I'm gonna kill you.
Once Jasmine found out about Robert's true colors, she did everything she could to leave him, even filing domestic violence charges.
The prosecution's theory is that Robert couldn't get over it.
Prosecutors believe that Robert was fueled by anger and distrust and that he had to control Jasmine.
He knew that she had filed domestic violence charges against him, and he knew that was the ultimate sign that he was losing control over her.
Prosecutors argue that Roberts would do anything to control Jasmine, including taking her life. And on the evening of October 28, 2020, that's exactly what he did.
Prosecutors say that night Robert drove to the home of his friend, Candace Oliver, and asked her for a ride.
I need you to do me a favor.
They claim this was a careful calculation to avoid his own vehicle being seen at the place of the crime.
I'll be right back.
He waited and lurked outside in the shadows. He waited for his opportunity to trap Jasmine in the confines of her vehicle.
The fact that he was able to wait for her to come out shows that this wasn't only a crime of passion, it was premeditated and it was planned.
As she was getting into her car, Roberts revealed himself and confronted her.
Hey, yo, Jazz, we need to talk.
Robert, what are you doing here? So you really thought the police was gonna help you, huh?
Robert shot her 3 times in cold blood, killing her instantly.
For some reason, he took her phone. Investigators aren't entirely sure as to why.
Oh my God, he shot right square in the head. Holy.
While a neighbor called 911, Robert fled back to Candace's SUV and returned to her place in Springfield.
If it had not been for the surveillance video, Robert may have gotten away with this.
After a 5-day trial, the jury retires to deliberate.
After hearing all the horrific facts of this case, it didn't take long for them to come back with a verdict.
Robert Roberts is found guilty of first-degree murder and is sentenced to life in prison.
He won't be eligible for parole until April of 2051.
Candace was never charged in connection to the crime due to her cooperation with police and the fact that she truly seemed clueless as to what was going to happen that night.
This is a classic case of fatal attraction. And no matter how hard she tried to get away from Roberts, he was so fatally attracted to Jasmine that he was not gonna stop until he took her life.
This was an individual who, in a premeditated and cold-blooded fashion, sought out a person that
October 22nd, 2014 began like any other cold autumn morning in Ottawa. The sky above the capital was pale grey, the kind of colourless sky that seemed to flatten the city into silence. Fallen maple leaves clung to the sidewalks after a night of light rain. Government workers hurried through downtown streets with coffee cups warming their hands. Tourists stopped near the National War Memorial to take photographs before the weather turned harsher. Nothing about that morning hinted that, within minutes, Canada's sense of safety would be shattered in the heart of its own democracy. At the centre of the memorial stood Corporal Nathan Cirillo. 24 years old. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A reservist in ceremonial uniform, standing motionless beneath the towering granite arch dedicated to soldiers who never came home. His rifle rested in perfect position against his chest. The wind tugged softly at the edge of his uniform as cars rolled through nearby intersections and commuters passed without really looking at him. Most people only saw a soldier standing guard. They did not see the son who still called his mother often. The father who adored his little boy. The young man who rescued dogs and smiled too easily. They did not know he had spent the previous evening laughing with friends. That he had plans for the future. That he was trying, like so many young adults, to figure out who he wanted to become beyond the uniform. And they certainly did not know that somewhere nearby, another man was moving toward him with murder already decided in his mind. At approximately 9:50 a.m., witnesses would later remember seeing a dark vehicle pull up near the memorial. At first, nobody paid attention. Downtown Ottawa was full of traffic. Government buildings surrounded the area. Security presence was common. Men stepped out of cars every minute. But this man moved differently. Fast. Purposefully. He carried a rifle. For one horrifying second, the people nearby could not process what they were seeing. Human beings have a strange instinct during moments of sudden danger. The brain searches desperately for ordinary explanations. Maybe it was police training. Maybe military exercise. Maybe security patrol. Then the gunfire erupted. Sharp cracks exploded through the cold morning air, bouncing violently across the stone buildings surrounding the Memorial Plaza. Birds burst upward from rooftops. Tourists screamed. Some dropped to the pavement instantly while others froze completely, unable to understand what was happening. Nathan Cirillo fell. The ceremonial stillness that had defined the memorial only seconds earlier collapsed into chaos. Witnesses later described seeing the gunman continue firing at close range. Cirillo's body crumpled near the base of the monument dedicated to Canada's war dead, his red ceremonial markings standing out against the grey stone and wet pavement. Nearby civilians began running in every direction. Some hid behind concrete barriers. Others sprinted toward parked vehicles. One man shouted for someone to call an ambulance while another tried desperately to reach the wounded soldier. But the attacker was not finished. That was the moment terror spread beyond a single act of violence. The gunman rushed toward a nearby vehicle, forcing the driver out before speeding away toward Parliament Hill, the political heart of Canada. Within moments, police dispatch systems exploded with overlapping emergency calls. Reports flooded in too quickly to verify. Shots fired. Officer down. Armed suspect heading toward Parliament. Possible terrorist attack. Inside the Parliament buildings, staff members continued their morning routines, unaware that death was racing toward them. Coffee brewed in office kitchens. Politicians prepared speeches. Clerks organized paperwork. Security officers monitored ordinary activity across the grounds. It was another Wednesday in Ottawa. Then people heard sirens. At first distant. Then multiplying. Then the sound that would become permanently burned into the memories of everyone inside the building, gunshots echoing through Parliament itself. The attacker stormed through the main entrance of Centre Block carrying his rifle openly. Witnesses later recalled the surreal horror of seeing an armed man running through the halls of Canadian government. Some initially thought it was a security drill. Others immediately understood they were witnessing something unimaginable. Panic spread floor by floor. Doors slammed shut. Furniture scraped violently across marble floors as workers barricaded entrances with desks and filing cabinets. Members of Parliament hid beneath tables. Some texted loved ones goodbye messages because they believed they were about to die. In one room, politicians who spent years arguing bitterly against one another suddenly crouched side by side in terrified silence. In another hallway, armed security officers moved toward the sound of gunfire. The building itself seemed to transform within seconds. Parliament Hill, normally filled with tourists, debate, ceremony, and controlled tradition, became a hunting ground. Then came more shots. Loud. Close. Echoing through stone corridors lined with portraits of Canadian history. People pressed themselves against walls, trembling as the sound traveled unpredictably through the building. Nobody knew how many attackers existed. Rumors spread instantly. Some believed multiple gunmen were inside. Others feared explosives. Phones buzzed non-stop with fragmented information and terrified messages. Outside, Ottawa descended into lockdown. Police vehicles flooded downtown intersections. Officers carrying assault rifles moved through streets usually crowded with office workers and visitors. Schools sealed their doors. Public transit halted. News helicopters circled overhead as Canadians across the country watched terrifying live broadcasts unfold in real time. For many citizens, the psychological shock came from one unbearable realization: if violence could erupt inside Canada's parliament, nowhere felt untouchable anymore. This was not happening in a distant war zone. This was Ottawa. This was Canada. For decades, Canada had cultivated an international identity associated with peacekeeping, diplomacy, and stability. Violent political attacks belonged to headlines from elsewhere. Not here. Not in the calm center of the nation's capital beneath autumn leaves and government flags. Yet now millions of Canadians sat frozen before televisions as armed police surrounded Parliament Hill. Inside Centre Block, the confrontation was approaching its end. Security personnel tracked the attacker through the corridors. Among them was Sergeant-at-Arms Kevin Vickers, a veteran security official known for his calm demeanor. Witnesses would later describe the intensity of those moments with near disbelief. Officers moved carefully through hallways not designed for gun battles. Every corner could conceal death. Then they found him. Gunfire exploded again inside the halls of Parliament. The exchange lasted only moments, but for those nearby it felt endless. The sound of bullets ripping through enclosed stone corridors created deafening echoes. Dust drifted through the air. People hiding behind barricaded doors held their breath, waiting to discover whether the shooter was still alive. When the shooting stopped, silence arrived suddenly and unnaturally. The attacker lay dead inside the building. But outside, nobody yet knew whether the nightmare was over. Police continued sweeping the area for additional suspects. Snipers positioned themselves across rooftops. Ambulances waited nearby as emergency crews searched room by room. Downtown Ottawa remained frozen beneath layers of fear and confusion. Near the National War Memorial, medics had fought desperately to save Nathan Cirillo. Blood stained the stone near the monument. Witnesses watched helplessly as emergency responders performed CPR on the young soldier. Some people cried openly. Others stood in numb silence, staring at the scene as if their minds refused to accept what their eyes were seeing. Hours earlier, he had simply been standing guard. Now the entire country knew his name. News outlets quickly filled with photographs of Cirillo smiling beside his dogs, embracing friends, laughing during ordinary moments of life. Canadians who had never met him felt an immediate emotional connection to the young reservist whose final moments unfolded in front of the nation. The image was devastating because of its innocence. A ceremonial guard. Unarmed against surprise. Shot beside a memorial honoring fallen soldiers. As the day unfolded, another unsettling picture emerged. The man responsible, Michael Zehaf-Bibeau, had spent years drifting through instability, addiction, criminal behavior, and increasing radicalization. Authorities would later uncover evidence of mental illness, social isolation, and extremist beliefs tangled together in dangerous ways. He had attempted to obtain a passport. He spoke of anger toward Canada's foreign policy. He appeared consumed by resentment and violence. But understanding motive did little to soften the horror. The emotional wound cut deeper because the attack struck symbols as much as people. The National War Memorial represented sacrifice. Parliament represented democracy. And both had been violated within minutes. As darkness fell over Ottawa that evening, candles began appearing across the city. Flowers accumulated near the memorial. Strangers hugged each other in silence. Canadians struggled to process the images replaying endlessly across television screens: the wounded soldier, terrified lawmakers, heavily armed police outside Parliament, and the haunting emptiness left behind after the violence ended. One photograph in particular pierced the nation's heart. Nathan Cirillo's dog standing beside his casket during the funeral procession. The animal did not understand politics. It did not understand extremism or terrorism or national trauma. It only understood absence. The image became symbolic of the grief felt across Canada. Because beneath all the political discussion and security debates, one truth remained painfully simple: a young man who woke up for work that morning never came home. And for many Canadians, that realization transformed October 22, 2014 into more than just a national security incident. It became the day innocence cracked inside the walls of Parliament itself. Ottawa in late October carries a very specific kind of cold. It is not yet the brutal winter that locks the city beneath snow and silence, but the air changes enough to remind people that summer is gone for good. The mornings arrive damp and grey. Breath becomes visible. Fallen leaves collect in the corners of sidewalks and swirl across streets lined with government buildings that seem permanently carved into stillness. For most Canadians, Ottawa is not merely a capital city. It is a symbol carefully constructed over generations. Order, stability, tradition, ceremony. A place where history is preserved behind stone walls and where politics unfolds through debate rather than violence. That illusion mattered deeply to the country. Unlike many nations shaped by revolutions or repeated domestic conflict, Canada had long embraced an image of controlled calm. Even its political identity felt quieter compared to larger world powers. Parliament Hill was less associated with danger than with guided tours, school field trips, tourists carrying cameras, and ceremonial guards standing motionless before monuments honoring the dead. At the center of this symbolic landscape stood the National War Memorial. Towering over Confederation Square in downtown Ottawa, the memorial had become sacred ground for Canadians. Bronze soldiers emerged from the granite arch as if marching eternally toward sacrifice. At its base burned the tomb of the unknown soldier, where visitors often lowered their voices instinctively despite the traffic nearby. Veterans gathered there during remembrance ceremonies. Families laid wreaths there every November. Children visited on school trips and learned the names of battles fought decades before they were born. And every day, ceremonial guards stood watch. To tourists, the guards appeared almost statuesque. Perfect posture, expressionless faces, immaculate uniforms. But behind those ceremonial roles were real people with ordinary lives beyond the ritual. One of them was Corporal Nathan Cirillo. Nathan was born in 1989 in Hamilton, Ontario, a steel city several hours southwest of Ottawa. Hamilton carried a rougher identity than the polished capital. Factories, working-class neighborhoods, old industrial scars. It was the kind of place where people learned resilience early. Friends later described Nathan as someone who could fit easily into almost any environment. He had a warm smile that disarmed people quickly. He joked often. He loved animals intensely, especially dogs. And like many young men his age, he was still trying to build a stable future while balancing responsibilities, dreams, and uncertainty. He joined the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, a reserve infantry regiment with deep historical roots. Military service gave him structure and identity. It also connected him to something larger than himself. Those who knew Nathan often said he genuinely loved wearing the uniform. Not in an arrogant way. More in the way someone feels proud to represent tradition and discipline. But Nathan's life was not some perfect patriotic portrait. He was human. He struggled financially at times. He faced challenges common to many young adults navigating early parenthood and unstable work opportunities. He had become a father at a young age and deeply loved his son Marcus. Friends remembered how his entire face changed when he talked about the child. There was softness there beneath the military bearing. A kind of vulnerable sincerity. He also loved rescue animals. Stories circulated after his death about how he cared for abandoned dogs and tried helping injured animals whenever he could. That detail stayed with people because it contrasted so painfully with the violence of the way he died. The image of a compassionate young reservist gunned down while standing ceremonial guard felt almost impossible for Canadians to emotionally reconcile. By October 2014, Nathan had become one of many reservists assigned ceremonial duties at the National War Memorial. The work required discipline more than danger. The guards stood publicly visible for hours at a time, often becoming background scenery to busy commuters and tourists. The assumption beneath those ceremonies was simple. Canada was safe. The idea of someone attacking a ceremonial guard at the War Memorial in broad daylight seemed absurd before it happened. But while Nathan lived within that world of ritual and ordinary aspirations, another life was unraveling elsewhere in Canada. Michael Zehaf-Bibeau's path toward violence was chaotic long before October 22. He was born in 1982 and came from a deeply complicated background. His mother worked within Canada's immigration system, a highly educated woman connected to government circles. His father came from Libya. On paper, his upbringing appeared far removed from the profile many people later imagined after the attack. But beneath the surface, instability followed him for years. By adulthood, Zehaf-Bibeau had accumulated a long history of drug abuse, theft, robbery, and erratic behavior. He drifted constantly between provinces, shelters, temporary housing, and periods of homelessness. Court records and police interactions painted a picture of someone increasingly disconnected from stability and structure. Friends and acquaintances described dramatic mood swings. Some believed he struggled with severe mental health problems. Others saw signs of paranoia and obsession. At times, he appeared deeply religious. At others, completely lost. One of the most unsettling aspects of his story was how fragmented his identity became over time. He did not fit neatly into a single category: criminal, addict, drifter, radicalized extremist, mentally unstable man. The boundaries blurred together. By 2014, Canadian authorities had become increasingly concerned about citizens traveling overseas to join extremist organizations in the Middle East. The rise of ISIS and online propaganda had created growing fears about radicalization among isolated individuals. Zehaf-Bibeau drew attention after attempting to obtain a passport. Authorities reportedly delayed his application because of concerns about potential extremist travel. For him, that rejection appeared to deepen resentment already consuming his thinking. He spent periods living in homeless shelters in Ottawa. People who encountered him during those months remembered unusual behavior: restlessness, agitation, intense political and religious conversations that could shift unpredictably. Some noticed signs of instability but did not necessarily perceive him as capable of violence on a national scale. That is often how these stories unfold afterward. Warning signs become clearer only in hindsight. Meanwhile, Ottawa itself continued functioning inside its familiar routines. Parliament Hill represented one of the most recognizable political sites in Canada. The Gothic Revival architecture of Centre Block dominated the skyline with its Peace Tower rising above the city. Tourists gathered there daily to photograph the buildings and watch ceremonial guards. School groups wandered through hallways lined with historical portraits and polished stone floors. Politicians argued fiercely inside parliamentary chambers, yet the environment itself still projected institutional calm. Security existed, of course. But before the attack, much of Parliament's atmosphere remained surprisingly accessible compared to heavily fortified government centres elsewhere in the world. Visitors could move relatively close to major buildings. The openness reflected Canada's confidence in its own safety. That confidence would become one of the attack's invisible victims. The broader atmosphere in Canada during 2014 also carried growing tension surrounding terrorism fears. Only 2 days before the Ottawa shooting, another violent extremist attack had occurred in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, Quebec, where a radicalized individual used a vehicle to kill a Canadian soldier. The country was already unsettled. News coverage debated security threats, foreign conflicts, and domestic radicalization. Still, few imagined the danger would escalate directly into Parliament itself. On the evening before the attack, Ottawa looked peaceful. Streetlights reflected against damp pavement. Government workers returned home. Restaurants filled with ordinary conversation. The Parliament buildings glowed softly against the dark autumn sky. Nearby hotels housed tourists unaware they were spending the night beside a future crime scene that would soon dominate international headlines. Nathan Cirillo spent that evening like countless other young men his age. He exchanged messages with friends. He spoke with loved ones. Nothing suggested his life was approaching its final hours. There is something especially tragic about ordinary evenings before historical violence. People laugh. They make plans for next week. They postpone phone calls believing there will always be more time. And then history arrives without warning. Somewhere in Ottawa that same night, Michael Zehaf-Bibeau was moving through his own private collapse. Investigators would later piece together fragments of his behavior leading up to the attack. Anger, isolation, ideological fixation, emotional instability. The exact balance between political extremism and psychological deterioration remains debated even today. What mattered most was that by morning, he had chosen violence. And no one around him fully understood how close he was to acting. Dawn broke cold over Ottawa on October 22. Commuters filled buses and trains entering downtown. Federal employees prepared for another routine workday. Journalists arrived at Parliament Hill carrying laptops and coffee cups. Security officers settled into familiar shifts. At the National War Memorial, ceremonial preparations began as usual. Nathan Cirillo dressed carefully in uniform. The ceremonial role demanded precision. Every detail mattered. Boots polished. Posture exact. Rifle positioned properly. The ritual itself carried historical weight extending back generations. Tourists slowly gathered near the memorial throughout the morning. Some paused respectfully. Others hurried past on their way to work. Traffic moved steadily through nearby intersections. Nothing about the atmosphere felt extraordinary. And that normality became one of the most haunting elements later remembered by survivors and witnesses. Because terror did not descend upon chaos. It descended upon routine. The city had no emotional preparation for what was coming. No alarms. No dramatic warning. Only a cold autumn morning unfolding exactly as expected until violence suddenly tore through the center of Canadian identity itself. Years later, many people who lived in Ottawa during that time would still remember tiny details from the hours before the attack. The smell of wet leaves. The grayness of the sky. The sound of distant traffic near Parliament Hill. Human memory often clings desperately to ordinary sensory details surrounding traumatic events, perhaps because the brain struggles to understand how normal life can transform into horror within seconds. For Canada, October 22 became one of those dates permanently divided into before and after. Before the gunfire, Parliament Hill represented openness. Afterward, it represented vulnerability. Before the attack, ceremonial guards symbolized tradition. Afterward, they symbolized sacrifice. And before that morning, Nathan Cirillo was simply a young reservist standing watch beneath a memorial. Soon, he would become the face of a national tragedy. Before Canada came to know Nathan Cirillo as the soldier who died at the National War Memorial, he was simply Nathan to the people who loved him. A son who called home. A father trying to build a future. A friend who laughed too loudly sometimes and cared too deeply about stray animals. The national tragedy would eventually freeze him forever in a single image, standing in ceremonial uniform moments before gunfire shattered the morning. But the real Nathan existed far beyond that final photograph. He was born on December 23, 1989, in Hamilton, Ontario, a city shaped by steel mills, labor, and generations of working-class families. Hamilton was not polished like Ottawa. It carried scars openly. Smokestacks, industrial neighborhoods, aging brick homes, bars filled with shift workers who ended long nights smelling of machinery and sweat. Yet for many families, there was pride in that toughness. Hamilton people survived hard things. They worked hard. They stayed loyal to each other. Nathan grew up surrounded by that environment. Friends later remembered him as energetic almost to the point of restlessness. He was the kind of child who struggled to stay still for long periods. He liked movement, noise, action. But beneath that energy was unusual sensitivity. Animals seemed drawn to him instinctively. Family members recalled how he would stop to help injured birds or stray dogs without hesitation. Long before his military service, there was already a protector instinct inside him. His relationship with his mother was especially close. Those who knew the family described regular phone calls, check-ins, moments of affection that survived even as Nathan entered adulthood. He was not emotionally distant in the way many young men tried to appear. He expressed love openly. That quality would later make his death feel even more personal to strangers reading about him. The details humanized him immediately. He was not a symbol yet. He was just a young man trying to navigate life. Like many people in their late teens and early 20s, Nathan's path was not perfectly straight. He searched for direction. He worked different jobs. He wrestled with financial pressure. Some days he seemed confident and motivated. Other days less certain about where life was leading him. But there was always one part of his identity that gave him visible pride: the military. Joining the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada offered him something stability alone could not provide. It gave him belonging, tradition, brotherhood, structure. Reserve military service demanded discipline, but it also created deep emotional bonds among soldiers who trained together, struggled together, and represented something older than themselves. Nathan embraced that world fully. Photographs from those years show him smiling beside fellow reservists, relaxed and confident in uniform. There was authenticity in those images. Not forced patriotism. Not performance. He genuinely cared about service. Friends later described how seriously he took ceremonial duties despite their repetitive nature. To outsiders, standing guard at a memorial might appear symbolic or even boring after hours of stillness. But Nathan understood what the role represented. The guards honored dead soldiers. Every movement carried ritual importance. That mattered to him. Outside military life, Nathan remained deeply connected to ordinary joys. He loved music, friends, casual nights out, and especially animals. One detail repeated often after his death involved his dogs. He adored them. Not casually. Completely. There are people who enjoy pets, and then there are people who emotionally anchor themselves through them. Nathan belonged firmly in the second category. Friends told stories about him rescuing neglected animals or spending money he barely had to care for them properly. One image that haunted the country after the shooting showed his dog during the funeral procession, standing beside the casket with visible confusion and loyalty. Canadians saw not just a fallen soldier in that moment, but evidence of the human life interrupted behind the uniform. And then there was Marcus, Nathan's son. Becoming a father changed him in ways friends noticed immediately. Parenthood frightened him sometimes because he wanted desperately to do it right. He worried about money, stability, responsibility. Yet those anxieties came from love rather than avoidance. People close to him said he lit up whenever talking about Marcus. The future suddenly mattered more because another life depended on him. That detail made his death almost unbearable for many Canadians. A child would now grow up without his father because of a mourning act of violence. The emotional impact spread far beyond politics. Nathan's personality also carried contradictions that made him feel real rather than idealized. He could be impulsive, sometimes immature, Sometimes overly trusting. He enjoyed attention and social energy. But he was also gentle in ways that surprised people. A friend later described him as someone who hated seeing others suffer. Another recalled how Nathan once spent hours trying to help a frightened dog nobody else wanted to approach. Those stories mattered because after national tragedies, victims often risk becoming flattened into symbols. The smiling soldier. The fallen hero. The headline photograph. But real people are textured. Complicated. Alive in specific ways. Nathan had favorite music. Favorite jokes. Private fears. Small insecurities. Ambitions still unfinished. On the surface, October 22nd looked like another ordinary workday for him. He woke before dawn to prepare for ceremonial duty in Ottawa. The process required careful attention to detail. Uniform pressed perfectly. Boots polished. Equipment checked thoroughly. Ceremonial guards represented military professionalism publicly, and appearance mattered enormously. The autumn air that morning carried sharp coldness as he arrived near the National War Memorial. Downtown Ottawa had already begun filling with commuters. Government employees crossed intersections carrying coffee cups. Tourists wandered nearby taking photographs beneath grey skies. Nathan and another reservist assumed their ceremonial positions beside the tomb of the unknown soldier. Stillness became part of the duty. Hours of standing alert while people passed nearby without fully noticing. But although ceremonial guards appear frozen from a distance, they remain intensely aware of their surroundings. Passing conversations. Traffic sounds. Weather changes. Movement in peripheral vision. Nathan likely experienced the morning as 1,000 small sensory fragments blending together, cold air against his face, footsteps across pavement, distant sirens somewhere downtown, leaves scraping softly across stone. No evidence suggests he sensed danger approaching. That detail matters because people often imagine victims somehow recognizing their final moments beforehand. In reality, life usually continues normally until violence interrupts without warning. Nathan probably expected the shift to end like every other ceremonial assignment before it. He would go home afterward. Call someone he loved. See his son again. Pet his dogs. Continue living. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Ottawa, Michael Zehaf-Bibeau moved steadily toward him. The contrast between their lives feels chilling in retrospect. Nathan represented stability, service, and connection despite his imperfections. Zehaf-Bibeau embodied fragmentation, resentment, and escalating instability. One man stood guard over national memory. The other carried violence into that sacred space. Yet neither understood fully that their paths were about to intersect. Witnesses later described Nathan moments before the attack as calm and professional. His posture remained exact beneath the memorial arch. Tourists nearby likely photographed him without realizing those images captured the final minutes of his life. Then the vehicle arrived. Then the gunman emerged. And within seconds, Nathan Cirillo transformed from a living human being into the center of a national nightmare. One of the cruelest realities of sudden violence is how quickly identity changes afterward. A person who spent decades building a life becomes permanently associated with the moment of death. Nathan's final role eclipsed everything else. News broadcasts repeated his photograph endlessly. Journalists interviewed friends and family members searching for details that could explain who he had been. Canadians learned about his dogs, his son, his warmth, his military pride. The nation collectively assembled fragments of his humanity while mourning someone most citizens had never met. For his family, however, the loss unfolded far more intimately. Before official statements, before national mourning, before televised ceremonies, there was simply shock. The unbearable phone calls, the confusion, the realization that someone they loved had been shot publicly while performing ceremonial duty. Families of victims often describe traumatic notification as surreal rather than immediately emotional. The brain rejects information too catastrophic to absorb instantly. Somewhere in Hamilton, people who knew Nathan suddenly confronted a reality impossible to prepare for. Their son was gone. Their friend was gone. Marcus's father was gone. And the entire country was watching. As media coverage intensified throughout the day, Nathan became symbolic of innocence violated. Canadians emotionally connected to the fact that he had been targeted while standing ceremonial guard at a war memorial. He was not engaged in combat overseas. He was not armed for battle. He represented tradition and remembrance. That symbolism amplified public grief dramatically. The image itself carried haunting power, a young reservist standing motionless beside a monument honoring fallen soldiers, only to become one himself moments later. People placed flowers at the memorial almost immediately after the shooting. Candles appeared by evening. Strangers who knew nothing about Nathan personally still felt compelled to mourn him because his death touched something larger than individual tragedy. It struck at national identity and collective assumptions about safety. But beneath all the symbolism remained the quieter truth of who Nathan actually was. A young father. An animal lover. A reservist proud of his uniform. A son who mattered deeply to his family. A man whose future remained unfinished. That unfinished future haunted people most. There would be no more ordinary mornings. No more awkward jokes with friends. No chance to watch Marcus grow older. No opportunity to become whatever version of adulthood he might eventually have reached. Violence ended all of it within seconds. And perhaps that is why Nathan Cirillo's story lingered so powerfully in the Canadian imagination afterward. Not because he was perfect. Not because he represented some flawless patriotic ideal. But because he felt unmistakably human. His life looked recognizable. Understandable. Fragile in the same ways all ordinary lives are fragile. Which meant that when Canadians watched the events of October 22 unfold, they were not simply witnessing an attack on Parliament or a national security crisis. They were watching the violent erasure of a real person standing quietly beneath a memorial on a cold autumn morning, never knowing history was already rushing toward him. The morning of October 22, 2014 unfolded with deceptive calm. Ottawa moved through its usual rhythm beneath low grey skies and cold autumn air. Office workers crossed intersections wrapped in scarves and heavy coats. Tour buses rolled slowly through downtown streets. Government employees entered federal buildings carrying coffee cups and stacks of paperwork. The city looked exactly as it always did in late October, controlled, orderly, predictable. Near the National War Memorial, tourists paused to photograph the ceremonial guards standing motionless beside the tomb of the unknown soldier. Some visitors whispered respectfully while others hurried past without fully noticing the two young soldiers maintaining their posts. Cars moved steadily around Confederation Square. Traffic lights changed. People checked phones. Life continued with the ordinary confidence of routine. Corporal Nathan Cirillo stood at attention beneath the memorial arch. The ceremonial uniform carried weight beyond appearance. Every detail reflected military discipline and remembrance. The polished boots. The rifle positioned perfectly. The rigid posture maintained despite cold wind and passing distractions. Nathan had performed ceremonial duty before. The repetition itself became almost meditative after enough hours standing guard. Nothing about the morning suggested danger. No raised alarms. No visible panic. No indication that within minutes the center of Canadian political identity would become the site of national trauma. Elsewhere in Ottawa, Michael Zehaf-Bibeau was already moving toward violence. Investigators later reconstructed parts of his final movements that morning. He had spent months drifting through instability and growing resentment. His life had narrowed into anger, obsession, and ideological fixation tangled together with mental deterioration. Whatever internal chaos drove him had finally reached action. He carried a rifle. And he had chosen his target carefully. The National War Memorial represented more than a location. It symbolized military sacrifice, Canadian identity, and national memory. Attacking there guaranteed psychological impact far beyond the immediate violence itself. Around 9:50 a.m., witnesses noticed a vehicle arriving near the memorial. At first, nobody reacted strongly. Cars stopped constantly around downtown Ottawa. Men exited vehicles every minute near government buildings and tourist sites. But then people noticed the rifle. Some witnesses later described an immediate sense of confusion rather than fear. Human beings are often slow to recognize danger in familiar environments. The brain instinctively searches for harmless explanations before accepting threat. Near Parliament Hill, security personnel and ceremonial weapons were not unusual sights. But this was different. The man moved rapidly, deliberately. He approached from behind. Nathan Cirillo never had time to defend himself. The first gunshot shattered the morning with terrifying suddenness. Witnesses described the sound as unnaturally loud against the surrounding stone buildings. Sharp cracks echoed violently across the plaza. For a split second, confusion froze nearby pedestrians in place. Then more shots followed. Panic erupted instantly. Tourists screamed and dropped to the ground. Some people ran blindly in whichever direction seemed safest. Others stood motionless in shock, unable to process what they were seeing. One witness later remembered seeing birds explode upward from nearby rooftops at the exact moment the gunfire began. Nathan collapsed near the base of the memorial. The attack happened at horrifyingly close range. Witnesses later stated the gunman continued firing after the soldier fell. The brutality lasted only moments, but trauma stretches time strangely. Survivors often describe seconds feeling endless during acts of violence. Nearby civilians reacted instinctively. Some hid behind concrete barriers. Others shouted for police. A few rushed toward the wounded soldier despite the danger. One witness later recalled seeing Nathan still attempting to move after falling. Another remembered the sight of blood spreading across the stone near the tomb of the unknown soldier. The image became permanently embedded in national memory because of the unbearable symbolism: a Canadian soldier dying beside a monument dedicated to fallen soldiers. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers immediately. Reports came in fragmented and chaotic. Shots fired at the war memorial. Soldier down. Armed suspect fleeing toward Parliament. Possible active shooter. Police operators struggled to process the volume of panic arriving simultaneously across emergency lines. But the violence was only beginning. After shooting Nathan Cirillo, Zihaf Bibo moved quickly toward a nearby vehicle. Witnesses later described scenes of total confusion as he carjacked a car and sped away from the memorial area. The realization spread rapidly among first responders that the suspect was heading directly toward Parliament Hill. That possibility seemed almost impossible to comprehend in real time. The center of Canadian government itself was under threat. Within minutes, the attacker arrived at Parliament Hill. The sprawling Gothic buildings stood against the grey Ottawa sky exactly as they had for generations, representing continuity and democratic tradition. Tourists still wandered portions of the grounds unaware of the violence unfolding only blocks away. Inside Centre Block, politicians attended meetings while staff members carried out ordinary work routines. Then Zihaf Bibo exited the vehicle carrying the rifle openly. Witnesses on Parliament Hill later described a surreal moment where reality itself seemed delayed. Seeing an armed man running toward Parliament with a weapon did not register immediately because the setting felt incompatible with that level of violence. Then he began moving fast toward the entrance. Security personnel reacted quickly, but the speed of the attack created chaos instantly. The attacker entered Centre Block while carrying the rifle, forcing his way into one of the most symbolically important buildings in Canada. Inside, normal life shattered within seconds. People heard gunshots echo through the hallways. At first, confusion spread more quickly than understanding. Some assumed construction noise. Others thought perhaps ceremonial activity outside had triggered unusual sounds. But then more shots erupted. Closer. Sharper. Panic spread room by room. Staff members began barricading doors with desks and chairs. Politicians dropped beneath tables. Office workers locked themselves inside meeting rooms while texting loved ones. Hallways emptied almost instantly as people searched desperately for secure hiding places. The architecture of Parliament itself intensified the terror. Centre block's long stone corridors amplified every gunshot into deafening echoes. People hiding in offices could not determine exactly where the shooter was located because the sound ricocheted unpredictably through the building. One staff member later described hearing footsteps running outside the door while everyone inside held their breath in silence. Another recalled pressing against a wall while trying not to cry because she believed the attacker might enter at any moment. Inside caucus rooms, members of Parliament from opposing political parties huddled together in fear. Some used furniture to reinforce entrances. Others searched online for breaking news while trapped inside secure rooms. Rumors spread rapidly through text messages and phone calls. There might be multiple shooters. There might be explosives. Nobody knew whether the attack had ended or was still expanding. Outside Parliament, Ottawa transformed into a city under siege. Police vehicles flooded downtown intersections from every direction. Officers carrying assault rifles sprinted across streets usually crowded with tourists and office workers. Sirens echoed continuously through the city center. Helicopters circled overhead while emergency alerts spread through media networks. Schools initiated lockdowns. Government buildings sealed entrances. Public transit halted. People trapped inside offices watched events unfold through television broadcasts and social media updates while hearing distant sirens outside their windows. For many Canadians watching live news coverage across the country, disbelief became the dominant emotion. Parliament Hill was not supposed to become a battlefield. The setting itself violated deeply rooted assumptions about national safety. Inside Centre Block, the confrontation intensified. Security personnel moved toward the attacker through narrow corridors and stairwells. Among them was Sergeant-at-Arms Kevin Vickers, a longtime parliamentary security officer respected for professionalism and calm under pressure. The pursuit unfolded rapidly inside the building. Witnesses later described hearing repeated bursts of gunfire echoing through marble halls lined with historical portraits and political offices. Dust drifted through the air after bullets struck stone walls and wooden fixtures. Some employees remained hidden silently beneath desks while others sent goodbye messages to family members because they believed they would not survive. Fear inside the building became intensely personal. Not abstract. Not political. Immediate survival terror. The attacker moved through hallways carrying enough ammunition to continue killing if not stopped quickly. Security officers understood the stakes immediately. Parliament contained hundreds of civilians, political leaders, journalists, and staff members trapped within confined spaces. Then came the final confrontation. Near the Hall of Honor, security officers confronted Zehaf Bibeau directly. Gunfire erupted again. Fast. Violent. Disorienting within the enclosed stone corridor. Kevin Vickers and additional security personnel opened fire on the attacker. Witnesses later described the exchange as deafening. Bullets struck walls and floors while people nearby remained hidden behind barricaded doors praying the shooting would stop. Seconds later, it was over. Michael Zehaf Bibeau lay dead inside Parliament. But outside the building, confusion still dominated the city. Authorities continued searching aggressively for possible accomplices. Reports of additional shooters circulated despite lack of confirmation. Downtown Ottawa remained locked down as tactical units searched rooftops, garages, surrounding buildings, and government offices. Near the National War Memorial, emergency responders fought desperately to save Nathan Cirillo. Paramedics performed CPR directly beside the monument while police secured the scene. Witnesses nearby stood trembling in shock. Some cried openly. Others stared silently at the blood-stained pavement as if unable to comprehend the reality before them. Despite emergency efforts, Nathan died from his injuries. He was 24 years old. The news spread rapidly through Canada. Television broadcasts interrupted regular programming. Images of Parliament Hill flooded screens nationwide. Journalists struggled to verify information while social media exploded with fear, speculation, and grief. Canadians watched heavily armed officers surrounding Parliament as smoke and emergency lights reflected against historic stone buildings. For many people, one realization became impossible to ignore. The violence had not targeted random civilians alone. It targeted symbols. A soldier standing ceremonial guard. The National War Memorial. Parliament itself. That symbolic dimension transformed the attack from a tragic shooting into something psychologically national in scale. As evening approached, Ottawa remained tense and heavily secured. Police tape surrounded the memorial where Nathan had fallen. Parliament Hill stayed under armed protection while investigators searched every corridor and office for evidence. Across the city, people gathered quietly near barricades holding candles and flowers. Strangers hugged each other. Some stood silently staring toward the memorial from behind police lines. Others simply tried to understand how one morning had altered the emotional landscape of an entire country. Inside countless homes across Canada, parents watched the coverage while children asked frightened questions. Politicians addressed the nation with visible emotion. Military personnel mourned one of their own. And somewhere beyond the noise of national crisis, one family faced the unbearable reality hidden beneath every major tragedy. Nathan Cirillo was not returning home. In the immediate aftermath of violence, time begins to behave strangely. Minutes stretch into something shapeless. Conversations become fragmented. People remember isolated images with terrifying clarity while entire sequences disappear into fog. On October 22, 2014, that distortion settled over Ottawa almost instantly after the shooting began. The city was still physically intact. Buildings still stood. Traffic lights still changed. But psychologically, everything had shifted. At the National War Memorial, the scene surrounding Nathan Cirillo became frozen between chaos and disbelief. Police officers rushed into Confederation Square within moments of the emergency calls. Sirens screamed through downtown streets as armed responders poured toward the monument from multiple directions. Witnesses stumbled away from the area in shock, some crying openly, others speaking in fragmented sentences that barely formed coherent descriptions. Many could not fully process what they had just seen. A soldier had been shot beside the tomb of the unknown soldier. In broad daylight. In the center of Canada's capital. Emergency responders found Nathan lying near the memorial, critically wounded. Blood stained the stone beneath him, spreading across the cold pavement in dark, uneven patterns. His ceremonial uniform, immaculate only minutes earlier, was now torn by gunfire. Paramedics dropped beside him immediately, working with desperate urgency while armed officers secured the perimeter around the monument. Witnesses later described the surreal contrast between the solemn beauty of the memorial and the violence erupting around it. Tourists who had been taking photographs moments earlier now crouched behind barriers or huddled against nearby buildings, trembling in shock. Some continued crying uncontrollably while speaking with police. Others simply stared at the scene silently, unable to look away. One witness recalled seeing Nathan's boots as paramedics worked over him. Another remembered the horrifying stillness of his ceremonial rifle lying near the monument. Tiny sensory fragments embedded themselves permanently into memory because trauma often preserves details with unnatural sharpness. Nearby, shell casings remained scattered across the pavement. Investigators arriving at the scene quickly recognized the symbolic magnitude of the attack. This was not merely a homicide scene. It was the center of a national emergency unfolding in real time. The National War Memorial immediately became both crime scene and sacred ground simultaneously. Police tape expanded outward rapidly as tactical teams secured surrounding intersections. Officers carrying rifles scanned rooftops and nearby vehicles while investigators attempted to determine whether additional attackers existed. At that stage, uncertainty dominated every decision. Nobody yet understood the scale of the threat. Inside Parliament Hill, confusion intensified. The center block hallways still carried the smell of gunpowder after the final confrontation. Broken fragments of plaster and stone littered sections of the corridor where bullets had struck walls during the exchange between security personnel and Michael Zehaf-Bibeau. The echoes of gunfire seemed to linger inside the building long after the shooting stopped. Security officers moved room to room conducting systematic sweeps. Doors were opened cautiously. Employees emerged slowly from barricaded offices, many visibly shaking. Some had spent nearly an hour hidden beneath desks or pressed silently against walls, believing death might enter through the door at any moment. Members of Parliament wandered through hallways pale and disoriented, still absorbing the reality that an armed gunman had penetrated the center of Canadian democracy. Staff members hugged each other openly. Some cried. Others compulsively checked phones, searching for updates about loved ones elsewhere in the city. The Hall of Honor became one of the most significant investigative locations inside Parliament. It was there that security officers had ultimately stopped Zehaf Bibeau. Bullet marks scarred portions of the historic corridor. Spent casings remained on the floor. Broken wood and debris reflected the intensity of the final confrontation. Investigators photographed everything meticulously. Every bullet trajectory. Every bloodstain. Every impact point along the stone walls. Forensic teams moved carefully through the building under heavy security presence. Parliament itself had transformed into a crime scene unlike anything modern Canada had experienced before. Outside, Ottawa remained locked down. Armored vehicles appeared near major intersections. Officers carrying tactical gear patrolled streets usually filled with tourists and civil servants. Downtown businesses closed abruptly. Schools maintained lockdown procedures while parents struggled to contact children through overloaded phone networks. Rumors spread faster than verified information. People reported possible additional shooters across the city. Some believed coordinated terrorist cells remained active. Others feared explosives had been planted near government buildings. Police spent hours chasing unconfirmed sightings while simultaneously trying to calm public panic. Television broadcasts intensified national anxiety. Live footage showed Parliament surrounded by heavily armed police. News anchors repeated fragmented details as they arrived. Canadians across the country watched scenes that felt emotionally incompatible with their understanding of national identity. Parliament Hill looked less like Ottawa and more like images associated with international terror attacks elsewhere in the world. Back at the memorial, efforts to save Nathan Cirillo ultimately failed. The announcement of his death spread quietly at first among responders and officials before reaching media outlets. 24 years old. A reservist. Father. Son. Ceremonial guard. The emotional reaction among military personnel was immediate and profound. Fellow soldiers arriving near the scene reportedly struggled to maintain composure. Ceremonial guards understood the vulnerability inherent in their role. They stood publicly exposed while representing military tradition and remembrance. The idea that one of their own had been executed at the memorial shook them deeply. As investigators secured the area, personal items remained scattered near the scene. Medical equipment. Abandoned bags from fleeing tourists. Fragments of interrupted ordinary life. One haunting aspect of violent crime scenes is how suddenly everyday objects become attached to horror. Coffee cups overturned beside police barriers. Dropped cell phones ringing unanswered. Leaves blowing across blood-stained pavement. Investigators began reconstructing the sequence of events almost immediately. Surveillance cameras around Confederation Square provided critical footage. Witness interviews established the attacker's rapid approach from behind Nathan Cirillo. Ballistics teams examined shell casings and weapon trajectories while federal agencies coordinated with local police and intelligence services. Attention quickly shifted toward identifying the gunman. Inside Parliament, Michael Zehaf Bibeau's body remained under heavy guard while forensic teams processed the scene. Investigators recovered the rifle used during the attack along with personal effects and identification materials. His path through the building became central to understanding how the breach occurred so rapidly. Security failures became an immediate concern. How had one armed man penetrated Parliament so quickly after murdering a soldier outside? Why were security layers unable to stop him before entering Centre Block? Could more lives have been lost? Those questions intensified public anxiety throughout the day. Meanwhile, hospitals across Ottawa prepared for the possibility of mass casualties. Emergency rooms activated crisis procedures while doctors and nurses waited for additional victims who ultimately never arrived. The uncertainty surrounding possible accomplices kept the city trapped in tension long after the gunfire ended. Within hours, investigators uncovered more information about Zehaf Babo's background, criminal history, drug abuse, mental instability, increasing radicalization, attempts to obtain a passport, connections to extremist ideology. Each new detail complicated public understanding of the attack. Was this terrorism? Mental illness? Political violence? Personal collapse? The answer appeared to involve all of them simultaneously. Yet while national attention focused increasingly on the attacker, another emotional reality unfolded quietly away from cameras. Nathan Cirillo's family was beginning to absorb the unimaginable. Some relatives first learned fragments of information through media alerts before official notification reached them fully. That horrifying modern reality has become common during national tragedies. News spreads publicly faster than families can emotionally prepare. In Hamilton, grief arrived like physical impact. Friends gathered together struggling to process disbelief. Military personnel contacted loved ones. Social media filled with photographs of Nathan smiling beside dogs, laughing with friends, holding his son. Canadians who had never heard his name that morning now searched desperately to understand who he had been. The details humanized the tragedy instantly. He loved animals. He adored his child. He served proudly. He was young. Too young. One image in particular began circulating widely across news coverage. Nathan standing proudly in military uniform, smiling naturally into the camera. The contrast between that warmth and the brutality of his death devastated people emotionally. At Parliament Hill, investigators continued working through the night. Bullet impacts were mapped carefully inside center block. Witness statements were cross-referenced against surveillance timelines. Security response sequences were analyzed minute by minute. Authorities sought to determine whether Zehaf Babo acted entirely alone or maintained outside support. The possibility of broader conspiracy terrified officials initially. Counterterrorism units examined digital records, phone communications, travel history, and ideological materials connected to the attacker. Every possibility had to be explored because the symbolic nature of the attack suggested deliberate political intent. Outside the National War Memorial, spontaneous memorials began forming before evening fully arrived. Flowers appeared first. Then candles. Then handwritten notes. People gathered quietly behind police tape despite the cold. Some stood in silence. Others cried openly. Veterans saluted the memorial as they passed. Strangers embraced one another simply because collective grief demanded human connection. The atmosphere felt strangely subdued rather than chaotic by nightfall. Shock had settled over the city. A kind of emotional exhaustion replaced the earlier panic. Police officers remained heavily armed throughout downtown Ottawa as floodlights illuminated Parliament grounds. Helicopters continued circling overhead. Yet beneath the visible security operation existed something harder to measure: psychological rupture. Canadians had watched violence invade spaces once associated with stability and ceremonial tradition. And they could not unsee it. The memorial itself became transformed after the shooting. Before October 22, it symbolized historical sacrifice tied mostly to distant wars and past generations. After Nathan Cirillo's death, it also represented immediate vulnerability. Modern violence. Domestic extremism. National trauma unfolding live before television cameras. Investigators eventually established a clearer timeline of the attack. Zehaf Babo had acted quickly and decisively. The shooting at the memorial lasted mere seconds. The drive to Parliament occurred almost immediately afterward. Security response inside center block prevented even greater loss of life. But understanding sequence did not reduce emotional impact. 4 witnesses, survivors, and the broader public, the sensory memories remained overwhelming. The sound of gunfire echoing through Parliament corridors. The sight of Nathan collapsing beside the monument. The panic inside barricaded offices. The blood on stone near the tomb of the unknown soldier. Those images embedded themselves deeply into Canadian memory because they represented more than isolated violence. They shattered assumptions about safety within the symbolic heart of the nation itself. And as investigators worked beneath harsh lights through the long Ottawa night, one painful truth became impossible to escape. Nothing about Parliament Hill would ever feel entirely the same again. By the morning after the attack, Ottawa no longer looked like the same city. The physical damage to Parliament Hill had been limited compared to the scale of fear that now hung over the capital, yet the atmosphere felt fundamentally altered. Armed officers remained stationed across downtown intersections. Police vehicles still blocked roads surrounding government buildings. Helicopters drifted overhead in slow circles as if the city itself had become suspicious of its own silence. Inside Parliament, many employees returned only briefly to collect belongings left behind during the chaos. Some refused to enter certain corridors at all. Others walked through center blocks staring at bullet marks embedded in stone walls, struggling to accept that gunfire had echoed through these historic halls less than 24 hours earlier. But while the country mourned Nathan Cirillo publicly, investigators faced a different challenge entirely. They needed to understand Michael Zehaf-Bibeau. And almost immediately, the investigation became tangled in contradictions. At first glance, the attack appeared straightforward. A radicalized gunman had murdered a ceremonial soldier before storming Parliament. Political leaders quickly described the incident as terrorism. News headlines around the world framed the shooting as an extremist attack against Canada itself. Yet the deeper investigators dug into Zehaf-Bibeau's life, the more unstable and fragmented the picture became. He was not a disciplined operative trained by an international terrorist organization. He had no sophisticated operational network. No complex planning infrastructure. No secret cell uncovered in the aftermath. Instead, investigators found chaos. A life collapsing inward for years. Police records revealed an extensive criminal history stretching back long before radical ideology appeared publicly in his behavior. Drug possession. Robbery. Violent incidents. Frequent arrests. He drifted between provinces and shelters, often struggling with addiction and instability. Friends and acquaintances described him as unpredictable. Restless. Sometimes intensely focused on religion and politics, other times barely coherent. The portrait emerging from the investigation was deeply unsettling because it resisted simplicity. Authorities began reconstructing his final months carefully. Zehaf-Bibeau had spent periods living in homeless shelters in Ottawa. Staff members later recalled troubling behavior, emotional volatility, angry political discussions, increasing fixation on global conflicts involving Muslim populations. Some remembered him speaking passionately about traveling overseas. Others recalled paranoid or erratic conversations that seemed disconnected from reality. One recurring detail quickly drew national attention. He had recently attempted to obtain a passport. Investigators confirmed that Zehaf-Bibeau wanted to leave Canada, reportedly intending to travel to the Middle East. Authorities had delayed his passport application due to concerns surrounding his background and possible extremist links. In retrospect, many investigators believed this rejection may have intensified his anger and accelerated his descent toward violence. But even that explanation failed to fully account for the attack. Mental health professionals reviewing aspects of his behavior noted signs suggesting severe psychological instability. Some acquaintances believed he suffered from paranoia or delusional thinking. Others described periods where he seemed detached from reality altogether. His life lacked structure, support, and consistent treatment. The investigation soon found itself navigating one of the most uncomfortable questions modern societies face after violent attacks. Where does ideological extremism end and mental collapse begin? For the public, however, nuance proved difficult during grief and fear. Canadians wanted answers. How had this happened? Could authorities have prevented it? Were more attacks coming? Inside federal agencies, pressure intensified rapidly. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Ottawa Police Service, Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and multiple federal departments coordinated around the clock. Investigators combed through Zehaf Bibeau's digital footprint searching for communications, affiliations, or evidence of broader conspiracy. His phone records, internet activity, shelter contacts, and family history all came under scrutiny. At first, fear of additional attackers dominated operational decisions. Several witness reports from the day of the attack mentioned possible accomplices, though many accounts contradicted one another. During mass panic, perception becomes unreliable. People misremember clothing, faces, directions, even the number of gunshots fired. Yet investigators could not dismiss any possibility initially. Teams executed search warrants connected to Zehaf Bibeau's known residences and contacts. Apartments were searched. Personal belongings seized. Digital devices analyzed. Officers interviewed relatives, shelter workers, former acquaintances, and anyone who might explain how one unstable man reached the point of attacking Parliament itself. What they found instead was isolation. Zehaf Bibeau appeared increasingly disconnected from stable relationships in the months before the shooting. His life had narrowed emotionally and psychologically. Addiction, criminal history, ideological obsession, and personal instability had fused together into something dangerous and volatile. His mother's statements added another painful layer to the investigation. She publicly expressed grief for Nathan Cirillo's family and horror over her son's actions. The emotional complexity devastated many observers. Behind national security language and political debate stood another family suddenly shattered by violence, though in a very different way. Investigators eventually uncovered a video Zehaf Bibeau had recorded shortly before the attack. In it, he referenced Canada's foreign policy and expressed anger toward the country. The footage reinforced the government's classification of the incident as ideologically motivated terrorism. Yet even the video carried signs of instability rather than organized militancy. His words lacked coherence at times. The delivery felt emotionally fractured. Analysts studying the recording later noted how difficult it was to separate political grievance from psychological deterioration. That ambiguity frustrated many people seeking clean explanations. The media environment surrounding the investigation intensified public fear dramatically. Continuous coverage replayed images of Parliament under siege while commentators debated radicalization, intelligence failures, and domestic security threats. Speculation spread faster than verified facts. Some news outlets implied broader terrorist networks before evidence supported those claims. For ordinary Canadians, uncertainty became exhausting. Parents worried about schools. Commuters looked differently at public spaces. Government employees entered buildings now guarded by visibly heavier security presence. The emotional impact extended far beyond Ottawa itself. Inside Parliament, witnesses continued providing statements to investigators in the days following the attack. Many remained visibly traumatized. Some struggled to describe events coherently because adrenaline and fear had distorted memory during the shooting. One staff member recalled hearing footsteps outside a barricaded office while believing the gunman was about to enter. Another described watching colleagues silently text family members goodbye messages while hiding beneath tables. Several politicians later admitted they genuinely expected to die inside Centre Block that morning. Security personnel also came under intense scrutiny. Investigators examined exactly how Zehaf Bibeau breached Parliament grounds so quickly after murdering Nathan Cirillo. Questions emerged about communication failures between outside police units and internal parliamentary security. Could barriers have stopped him sooner? Were officers properly equipped? Did institutional assumptions about Canadian safety leave Parliament vulnerable? Those debates soon expanded into national political conflict. Some leaders argued the attack proved Canada faced growing extremist threats requiring stronger surveillance powers and expanded security legislation. Others warned against allowing fear to reshape civil liberties too aggressively. The emotional atmosphere after the attack made balanced discussion difficult. Meanwhile, Nathan Cirillo's family prepared for funeral arrangements beneath overwhelming public attention. That contrast between intimate grief and national symbolism often defines tragedies like this. While governments debated policy and investigators pursued answers, one family simply mourned a son and father whose life ended violently beneath a war memorial. Photographs of Nathan flooded media coverage constantly. Smiling with friends. Holding his son. Posing proudly in uniform. Playing with dogs. Each image reinforced the humanity behind the headlines. And every detail about his life intensified public anger toward the attacker. Investigators continued reconstructing Zehaf Bibo's movements before the attack minute by minute. Surveillance footage showed his approach toward the memorial. Witness statements confirmed the speed and aggression of the shooting itself. Ballistics analysis matched weapons recovered inside Parliament to the attack outside. The timeline became horrifyingly clear. Nathan Cirillo had almost no chance to react. The attack was designed for shock and symbolism rather than prolonged confrontation. Inside Parliament, forensic teams mapped bullet trajectories throughout centre block. The final gunfight involving security personnel, including Sergeant-at-Arms Kevin Vickers, became central to understanding how close the situation came to escalating further. Investigators concluded the rapid response likely prevented additional deaths inside the building. Vickers himself became a national figure almost overnight. Media outlets portrayed him as a hero who helped stop the attacker before Parliament descended into even greater catastrophe. Yet those close to him later suggested the emotional burden remained heavy despite public praise. Violent encounters leave psychological scars even on trained professionals. As days passed, another uncomfortable realization emerged. There had been warning signs surrounding Zehaf Bibo for years. Criminal instability. Mental health concerns. Radical rhetoric. Drug abuse. Violence. Yet no single system fully contained or addressed the danger developing inside him. That realization haunted many investigators afterward because modern threat assessment often depends on identifying individuals who exist precisely within these unstable gray areas. Zehaf Bibo was not invisible to authorities. He was known. Fragmentedly. Incompletely. Across different systems that never fully connected. The investigation gradually concluded that he acted alone operationally. No larger terrorist cell emerged. No coordinated attack network materialized. But emotionally, that conclusion offered limited comfort. A single unstable individual had still managed to murder a soldier and penetrate Parliament itself within minutes. The psychological damage remained enormous. By early November, memorials honoring Nathan Cirillo continued growing across Canada. Schools held moments of silence. Veterans attended ceremonies in uniform. Citizens left flowers near military memorials nationwide. His death had become deeply woven into the country's emotional response to the attack. Yet behind public unity, fear lingered quietly. People now looked differently at ceremonial guards standing publicly exposed. They looked differently at Parliament security. They looked differently at strangers carrying backpacks near government buildings. Violence had altered perception itself. And for investigators reviewing the life of Michael Zehaf Bibo, perhaps the most haunting truth remained how ordinary his collapse initially appeared. Another unstable man drifting through addiction, resentment, and failed systems. Another person losing connection to reality slowly enough that nobody fully recognized the danger until blood stained the stone beneath the National War Memorial. By then, of course, it was already too late. In the days following the attack, Ottawa remained physically secure but emotionally unsettled. The visible signs of crisis began to slowly recede from the streets, yet the psychological weight of what had happened did not follow the same timeline. Police barriers around Parliament Hill stayed in place longer than most people expected. Armed officers continued patrolling downtown intersections. Helicopters no longer circled constantly, but their absence did not restore comfort. Instead, it left behind a lingering awareness that the calm had been reassembled, not truly restored. Inside investigative headquarters, pressure reached a critical point. Authorities understood they were no longer simply documenting a crime. They were attempting to reconstruct a rapidly unfolding act of violence that had crossed multiple jurisdictions, symbolic targets, and emotional fault lines within the country. The key question driving all efforts was no longer just what happened, but why it had happened in this specific way, at this specific place, at this specific moment. The breakthrough began not with a single discovery, but with convergence. Fragments of evidence that had initially seemed disconnected started forming a coherent pattern when placed together. Surveillance footage from Confederation Square confirmed the precise sequence of the shooting at the National War Memorial. Witness accounts aligned with the timing of gunfire. Ballistics reports matched the weapon used in both the attack on Nathan Cirillo and the subsequent confrontation inside Parliament. Slowly, the chaotic uncertainty of the first hours gave way to structured understanding. One of the most important elements in the investigation was the recovery of Michael Zehaf-Bibeau's personal effects. Among them were digital devices, written notes, and fragmented communications that revealed his state of mind in the final period before the attack. None of the material pointed to a coordinated organization directing his actions. Instead, it revealed increasing isolation, ideological fixation, and psychological instability that had intensified over time. Investigators analyzing his digital history found patterns rather than plans. Repeated searches related to political conflicts, religious identity, and grievances involving Western foreign policy. Interspersed among these were periods of inactivity and disorganization, suggesting a mind oscillating between obsession and collapse. There was no evidence of structured operational planning consistent with trained militant networks. Instead, there was urgency without architecture, anger without strategy. At the same time, the timeline of the attack itself became clearer through reconstruction of movement and surveillance data. Zehaf-Bibeau had arrived near the memorial shortly before 9:50 a.m. He exited his vehicle carrying a rifle and moved directly toward Nathan Cirillo without hesitation or deviation. The speed of the approach indicated premeditation in target selection, but the lack of tactical complexity suggested an individual acting alone rather than under external coordination. After the shooting at the memorial, he immediately commandeered a vehicle and drove toward Parliament Hill. The transition between sites occurred within minutes, leaving no indication of delay or communication with others. This rapid escalation reinforced the conclusion that the entire sequence had been internally driven rather than externally orchestrated. Inside Parliament, forensic reconstruction of the building revealed how quickly the situation had escalated into a life-threatening breach. Entry points, corridors, and interior movement paths were mapped in detail. Security footage and witness statements confirmed that Zehaf-Bibeau had entered center block and moved through internal spaces before being intercepted by parliamentary security personnel. The most significant breakthrough in understanding the interior confrontation came from synchronized analysis of multiple eyewitness accounts. Although individual memories varied due to stress and fear, overlapping details confirmed the core sequence. Gunfire inside the building was brief but intense. Security personnel engaged the attacker rapidly after identifying his location. The confrontation ended within minutes, preventing further movement deeper into the parliamentary complex. Sergeant-at-Arms Kevin Vickers became a central figure in this phase of the investigation. His role in the final interception of the attacker was reconstructed carefully through physical evidence, ballistic analysis, and testimony from multiple officers present in the corridor. What emerged was a coordinated response under extreme pressure, where rapid decision-making prevented the attacker from advancing further into areas containing large numbers of civilians. Yet despite the operational clarity of the response inside Parliament, investigators remained focused on a larger question surrounding the external attack at the National War Memorial. Why had Nathan Cirillo been targeted specifically? Was the memorial itself the intended symbol, or was the selection of target more opportunistic than strategic? The answer appeared to lie in the convergence of ideology and visibility. The memorial represented a highly symbolic national site, one that combined military remembrance with public accessibility. It was heavily visible, lightly defended, and emotionally significant. For an attacker seeking both impact and symbolism, it presented a target that satisfied multiple psychological and tactical conditions simultaneously. Psychological analysis of Zihaf Babo's behavior suggested that symbolism played a critical role in his decision-making. He was not merely selecting a physical location, but an idea embedded within national identity. The soldier standing ceremonial guard embodied that idea in human form, transforming abstract symbolism into immediate, visible reality. That transformation was central to understanding the attack. Nathan Cirillo was not engaged in combat. He was not deployed overseas. He was not operating in a conflict zone. He was standing in ceremonial duty at a domestic memorial. That contrast intensified the psychological shock of the event. Investigators and analysts alike recognized that the attacker's choice reflected an intent to disrupt not only security structures, but emotional assumptions about safety within national symbols. As evidence accumulated, federal authorities began preparing a formal classification of the incident. The determination that emerged classified the attack as ideologically motivated violent extremism conducted by a lone actor. This designation carried significant implications because it placed the event within a broader global pattern of individuals radicalized through fragmented ideological exposure rather than organized military training. However, even as classification efforts progressed, uncertainty remained regarding the precise balance between ideology and mental instability. Some behavioral experts involved in the review process emphasized the presence of severe psychological disorganization. Others highlighted the clear presence of ideological grievance. The difficulty lay in separating the two when they appeared so deeply intertwined within the same individual. Public communication of the investigation results was handled carefully. Authorities emphasized the lone actor nature of the attack to prevent widespread fear of coordinated networks. At the same time, they acknowledged the ideological dimension to ensure transparency about motive. The messaging aimed to stabilize public perception while avoiding oversimplification. Behind the scenes, however, internal discussions within security agencies were more complex. The attack exposed gaps in intelligence coordination, particularly in tracking individuals who move fluidly between criminal history, mental health instability, and ideological radicalization. Zihaf Babo had appeared in various systems over time, but no single framework had captured the full scope of risk he eventually represented. That realization led to intense internal reviews across multiple agencies. How could fragmented information be integrated more effectively? How could behavioral warning signs be assessed without infringing civil liberties? How could public spaces of symbolic importance be protected without fundamentally altering their accessibility? These questions did not produce immediate answers, but they shaped the direction of future policy discussions. Meanwhile, attention also turned toward understanding the precise moments of failure and response during the attack itself. Security protocols at Parliament were reviewed in detail, including communication timing between external and internal units. Investigators examined how quickly information traveled once the shooting at the National War Memorial occurred, and whether earlier intervention could have been possible. Findings indicated that while response times were rapid under the circumstances, the attacker's movement between sites occurred faster than any realistic interception window available at the initial stage of the event. This conclusion did not eliminate criticism, but it clarified the structural limitations of real-time response in dynamic urban environments. As the investigative phase moved toward closure, public focus gradually shifted from immediate shock to longer-term reflection. Memorials for Nathan Cirillo expanded across the country. Military ceremonies honored his service. Schools and communities held commemorative events that emphasized both his personal humanity and his symbolic role in the tragedy. Within Parliament itself, physical repairs began quietly. Bullet damage was repaired. Corridors were restored. Security infrastructure was reinforced. Yet those who worked in the building often described a lingering sense of awareness that could not be repaired in the same way as stone and wood. The memory of what occurred there remained embedded in the environment. For investigators, The breakthrough phase ultimately led to a conclusion that was both clarifying and unsettling. The attack was not the result of a coordinated network, nor a purely random act of violence. It emerged from a convergence of personal collapse, ideological fixation, and opportunity. A single individual, operating within a fractured psychological state, had managed to exploit symbolic and physical vulnerabilities in a way that produced national shock. That understanding closed the investigative loop in procedural terms. But emotionally, it did not close anything at all. The courtroom where the proceedings unfolded was quieter than most people expected for a case of this magnitude. There were no dramatic outbursts, no visible collapse of order, no chaotic interruptions that often appear in fictional portrayals of justice. Instead, there was a controlled stillness that felt heavier than noise. Every seat filled, every movement restrained, every breath measured carefully in a space where the emotional weight of what had happened could not be contained but also could not be openly released. Although Michael Zehaf-Bibeau was already dead at the time of trial proceedings, the legal process surrounding the attack continued in a different form. It was no longer about determining guilt in the traditional sense. That had already been established through forensic reconstruction, ballistic evidence, and verified timeline analysis. Instead, the focus shifted toward understanding accountability, classification, and the formal legal interpretation of what had occurred on October 22, 2014. In this context, the name Nathan Cirillo became central not only to the narrative of the attack, but to the legal framing of its consequences. His death was not treated as an isolated act of violence, but as the triggering point of a broader national security incident that extended into Parliament itself. Every detail of his final moments was examined with clinical precision by investigators who understood that the legal system needed absolute clarity, even in the face of overwhelming emotional weight. The evidence presented in official inquiries reconstructed the sequence of events with exacting detail. Surveillance footage, ballistic trajectories, witness testimony, emergency response logs, and internal security communications were all introduced into the formal record. Together, they created a timeline that left little ambiguity about the rapid progression of the attack from the National War Memorial into the parliamentary complex. Yet even as facts were established, the courtroom atmosphere reflected something deeper than procedural clarity. Families of victims, including Nathan Cirillo's relatives, were present during portions of the proceedings. Their presence was quiet but emotionally powerful. They did not need to speak for the weight of their loss to be felt. Every image shown, every description read aloud, carried a personal dimension that extended beyond legal language. For Nathan's family, the proceedings were not about establishing guilt. That question had already been resolved in the most irreversible way possible. Instead, they represented an attempt to understand the structure of the event that had taken his life. The difference may seem subtle, but emotionally it is profound. One seeks judgment. The other seeks comprehension. Throughout the proceedings, the courtroom was repeatedly confronted with the contrast between procedural language and human consequence. Legal terminology described actions in measured, neutral terms. Yet behind each phrase stood a real moment of violence that had permanently altered lives. When the shooting at the National War Memorial was described, it was not merely an incident involving discharge of a firearm. It was the moment a young soldier standing ceremonial guard was struck down in public view. Nathan Cirillo's name appeared frequently in testimony and exhibits. Each time it was spoken, there was a noticeable shift in the room. Not dramatic, but present. A subtle acknowledgement that beneath the legal structure of the case lay an individual whose life had been abruptly and violently interrupted. Witness accounts from the memorial were read into the record with careful attention to accuracy. They described confusion, shock, and immediate panic. They described the impossibility of processing what was happening in real time. Many witnesses had initially struggled to interpret the gunfire, their minds searching for explanations that fit within the normal expectations of a public space. That hesitation, that brief delay between perception and understanding, became a recurring theme in how the event unfolded. Inside Parliament, testimony focused on the rapid transition from routine governmental activity to emergency lockdown. Staff members recounted barricading doors, hiding beneath furniture, and sending messages to loved ones while uncertain whether they would survive. These accounts reinforced the speed at which the situation escalated and the intensity of fear experienced within the building. Security personnel also provided detailed testimony regarding the confrontation with the attacker inside Center Block. Their descriptions were precise, shaped by training and necessity, but still carried emotional undercurrents that could not be fully suppressed. They described movement through corridors, identification of threat, and the brief but intense exchange that ended the attack within the building. Kevin Vickers, whose actions played a decisive role in stopping the attacker, became a focal point of testimony. His account was presented with restraint, reflecting both professionalism and emotional burden. Those who observed him during proceedings noted the controlled manner in which he described events, as if carefully balancing factual accuracy with personal memory that remained difficult to revisit. The legal classification of the attack as an act of ideologically motivated violence was reaffirmed during these proceedings. Authorities emphasized that the attacker acted alone, without operational support from organized groups. This distinction carried significant legal and policy implications, particularly in how future threats would be assessed and categorized. However, the courtroom did not exist in isolation from public sentiment. Outside the formal structure of legal argument, the broader national conversation remained deeply emotional. Canadians continued to process the attack not only as a security incident, but as a symbolic rupture in the perception of safety within national institutions. Nathan Cirillo's funeral had already taken place by the time these proceedings advanced. That ceremony had drawn widespread public attention and national participation. Military honors were rendered with precision and respect. The presence of his family, particularly his young son, became a focal point of national empathy. Images from the funeral circulated widely, shaping public memory of the victim not as a distant figure, but as a real person embedded in family relationships and everyday life. In court, however, those personal dimensions were deliberately kept separate from legal judgment. The structure of the proceedings required emotional distance even when the subject matter demanded emotional recognition. This tension between human grief and institutional procedure defined much of the atmosphere throughout the trial phase. As the proceedings moved toward conclusion, attention gradually shifted from reconstruction of events to reflection on broader implications. Experts testified about security vulnerabilities, radicalization pathways, and institutional response mechanisms. Discussions extended beyond the specific attack to consider systemic improvements intended to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents in the future. Yet even these technical discussions repeatedly returned, directly or indirectly, to the image of a young soldier standing guard at a memorial. That image had become central not only to public memory, but to the legal and institutional understanding of what had occurred. It represented the intersection of symbolism and vulnerability, tradition and exposure, duty and risk. When formal proceedings concluded, there was no sense of resolution in the emotional sense. Legally, the case had reached its necessary endpoints. Classification had been established. Responsibility had been defined. Security implications had been documented. But none of these outcomes could reverse what had happened or fully address the human consequences that remained. For Nathan Cirillo's family, the courtroom process marked one stage in a longer journey of grief that did not follow procedural timelines. For investigators and security officials, it marked the beginning of ongoing efforts to interpret and respond to the vulnerabilities exposed by the attack. For the country as a whole, it became part of a collective memory that would continue to influence perceptions of safety, symbolism, and national identity. The trial did not close the story. It only formalized it. In the aftermath of the proceedings, when legal language had settled into official records and headlines had moved on to other crises, what remained was something quieter and more persistent. The memory of October 22, 2014 did not fade in Canada. It simply changed form. It became part of the national consciousness, not as a distant historical event, but as a rupture in the assumed safety of everyday life. Ottawa slowly returned to its routines. Parliament Hill reopened fully. Tourists once again walked the grounds. Government employees resumed their daily schedules inside Center Block. The National War Memorial, repaired and restored, continued to stand in Confederation Square as it had before. Traffic flowed through downtown intersections. Cafes filled with morning commuters. The city visually healed in ways that made it appear normal again. But those who lived through the day understood that normality had been altered rather than restored. The space around the memorial carried a different weight afterward. People still visited, still paused, still observed moments of respect, but something had changed in how silence was experienced there. It was no longer only historical remembrance. It was also recent memory. The figure of Nathan Cirillo became permanently embedded in that space, not as an abstract symbol, but as a young man whose final moments unfolded in public view. For his family, the passage of time did not soften the absence. It structured it. Life continued in new patterns shaped around loss rather than before it. His son grew older with memory preserved through stories rather than shared experience. His loved ones spoke about him not only as a soldier, but as a father, a friend, a person whose life contained ordinary moments that never reached public attention but mattered deeply within private circles. Across Canada, the reaction to Nathan's death evolved into something broader than grief alone. It became reflection. Communities held remembrance ceremonies not only for him, but for the meaning attached to his service. Military personnel across the country continued ceremonial duties with renewed awareness of vulnerability. The idea of standing guard at a public memorial carried a different emotional resonance after that day. Security practices also changed. Parliament Hill and surrounding federal buildings underwent significant adjustments in protective measures. Access points were restructured. Screening procedures became more stringent. Coordination between agencies improved as lessons from the attack were integrated into long-term policy. These changes were not always visible to the public, but they reshaped how national institutions understood risk. Yet even as systems evolved, the emotional memory remained unchanged. Michael Zehaf-Bibeau's name entered public discourse in a different way than his victims. While Nathan Cirillo became associated with remembrance and service, Zehaf-Bibeau became associated with fragmentation and collapse. His life was analyzed repeatedly in attempts to understand how an individual could move from instability into irreversible violence. Discussions about mental health, radicalization, and systemic gaps continued long after official investigations concluded. But no explanation fully resolved the discomfort the event created. Because the attack did not fit neatly into a single category, it existed at the intersection of ideological extremism, personal disintegration, and opportunity. That complexity made it difficult to reduce into simple narratives. And yet public memory often seeks simplicity even when reality resists it. Over time, annual commemorations began to anchor the memory of Nathan Cirillo within national ritual. Moments of silence were observed. Wreaths were laid at the National War Memorial. Military honors continued to acknowledge his service. These acts did not erase the tragedy, but they gave it structure within collective remembrance. Visitors to Ottawa often encountered the memorial without knowing the full story behind it. Some learned through plaques or guides, others through conversation or media, and some simply felt the atmosphere of the place without fully understanding its layered history. That is how public memory often functions. It exists at different levels of awareness, from deep personal knowledge to vague recognition. For those directly affected, however, there was no distance. The event remained immediate in memory regardless of time past. Nathan Cirillo's life, though brief, became part of a larger narrative about service, vulnerability, and national identity. He was remembered not only for how he died, but for how he lived. The affection for animals, the devotion to his son, the pride in wearing his uniform, the ordinary struggles of a young man trying to build stability within an uncertain world. These details mattered because they restored individuality to a moment that could otherwise be reduced to statistics or headlines. In reflecting on the broader impact of the attack, Canada also confronted uncomfortable questions about openness and security. The balance between accessible democratic spaces and protective measures became a subject of ongoing debate. Parliament Hill had long represented a visible expression of democratic transparency. After the attack, that visibility was reconsidered through a new lens shaped by vulnerability. Yet despite changes in infrastructure and policy, the symbolic meaning of the site remained intact. It continued to represent national governance, history, and identity. The attack did not destroy that symbolism. It altered its emotional texture. In the years that followed, the memory of October 22 did not dominate daily life, but it resurfaced in moments of national reflection. Anniversaries, security discussions, and public commemorations brought it back into focus. Each return reinforced the same dual awareness, that ordinary spaces can become sites of extraordinary violence, and that individuals within those spaces carry stories that extend far beyond the moment of tragedy. Nathan Cirillo's name became part of that awareness. Not as a distant historical figure, but as a reminder of presence interrupted. A life that existed fully before becoming part of national memory. The National War Memorial continues to stand in Ottawa, unchanged in structure, but layered with meaning that now includes both remembrance and loss. People still pass it daily. Some pause. Some do not. Some know the history deeply. Others only partially. But beneath all those varying levels of awareness, the event of 2014 remains embedded in the collective understanding of the place. In the end, the aftermath of the attack did not resolve into closure. It resolved into continuity. Life in Canada continued, institutions adapted, policies changed, and public memory absorbed the event into its broader historical fabric. But the emotional echo of that morning remained, carried quietly by those who remember and indirectly by those who inherit the story. And at the center of it all remains the image that cannot be separated from the narrative, a young soldier standing ceremonial guard in a place dedicated to remembrance, whose life became part of what the memorial itself was built to honor. In the years that followed the attack, Ottawa gradually resumed its rhythm, but it was no longer the same rhythm it had been before. The change was not visible in architecture or street layout. It existed in perception, in the subtle awareness that the center of Canadian democracy had once been breached in a matter of minutes. Parliament Hill continued to function as the heart of political life, yet the memory of that morning lingered like an invisible layer over everything that happened thereafterward. Visitors still arrived in large numbers. Tourists took photographs in front of the Peace Tower. School groups continued to walk the grounds, listening to guides explain the history of Canadian governance. Government employees entered and exited the buildings each day, carrying on debates, drafting legislation, and participating in the ordinary machinery of a functioning state. On the surface, nothing appeared disrupted. But beneath that surface, something had changed permanently in how the space was emotionally understood. The National War Memorial, once primarily associated with historical remembrance, now carried a second, more recent meaning. It remained a place honoring those who served and died in past conflicts, but it also held the memory of a young soldier who died in the present. Nathan Cirillo's name became inseparable from the site itself. People who visited often stood there longer than before, even if they did not fully articulate why. Silence felt heavier in that space, as if layered with more than one era of grief. For Nathan's family, time moved differently than it did for the public. Public memory condensed his life into a symbol of service and sacrifice, but privately he remained a son, a father, a friend whose absence continued to shape daily life in quiet and enduring ways. His child grew up hearing stories rather than living shared experiences. His loved ones carried memories that did not fade but evolved into something stable and permanent, like a photograph that never changes even as life around it moves forward. Across Canada, the attack became part of a broader national understanding of vulnerability. It was no longer viewed only as an isolated act of violence, but as a moment that exposed how even symbolic and ceremonial spaces could be targeted unexpectedly. Security systems were strengthened, coordination between agencies improved, and protective measures around Parliament Hill were significantly expanded. These changes were implemented quietly but thoroughly, reshaping how public access to governmental spaces was managed. Yet even as systems evolved, the emotional memory remained unchanged. Michael Zehaf-Babo's actions continued to be studied in academic and security contexts, often cited in discussions about radicalization, mental instability, and lone actor violence. Analysts examined how fragmented ideology and personal collapse can intersect in ways that produce unpredictable outcomes. His case became part of a larger global pattern studied by security agencies attempting to understand how individuals move from grievance into action without organizational structure. Still, no analysis fully resolved the deeper discomfort the event created. The fact that a single individual, operating largely alone and without sophisticated planning infrastructure, had been able to penetrate the symbolic center of Canadian governance remained difficult to fully absorb even years later. Public commemoration of Nathan Cirillo became an important part of how Canada processed that discomfort. Annual ceremonies at the National War Memorial honored his service alongside others who had fallen in military history. These events were not only acts of remembrance but also acts of reaffirmation, reinforcing the values of service, duty, and collective identity that the memorial itself represented. Over time, his image became familiar to many Canadians who had never known him personally. A young reservist in ceremonial uniform. A father. A son. A man standing guard in a place dedicated to memory, whose own memory became part of that same space. His story was retold in documentaries, articles, and public commemorations, not as sensational tragedy but as human narrative embedded within national identity. For those who worked in Parliament, the memory of the attack also remained present in more subtle ways. New security protocols became routine. Access procedures were normalized. Visitors passed through screening systems that had not existed in the same form before 2014. The building itself continued to function as a place of governance, but the awareness of vulnerability had been permanently integrated into its daily operations. There were no dramatic reminders in everyday life. No constant visible markers of the attack. Instead, there was a quiet persistence of awareness among those who understood what had happened there. A recognition that stability is maintained, not guaranteed. In reflecting on the broader meaning of the event, many observers noted how it revealed the intersection between symbolism and fragility. The National War Memorial was designed to represent sacrifice in distant wars, yet it became the site of a modern act of violence. Parliament Hill was intended to embody democratic continuity, yet it experienced a breach that momentarily disrupted that continuity. These contrasts became central to how the event was understood in the long term. Nathan Cirillo's death, in particular, became a focal point for that reflection because of where and how it occurred. A ceremonial guard standing in a public space dedicated to remembrance, killed in the act of service itself. The symbolism was not constructed afterward, it was inherent in the moment. That is why it remained so deeply embedded in public memory. Over time, the intensity of public attention faded, as it always does with national tragedies. News coverage moved on. Political debates shifted to other issues. New events occupied headlines. But the memory did not disappear. It settled into a quieter form of presence, resurfacing during anniversaries or moments of reflection. For Canada, the attack became part of its modern historical landscape. Not defining the nation, but existing within its narrative as a reminder of how quickly assumptions of safety can be disrupted. It influenced policy, security, and public awareness, but it also influenced something less tangible, the emotional understanding of space, symbolism, and vulnerability. In the end, what remained was not only the account of violence, but the recognition of human lives intersecting briefly with historical forces beyond their control. Nathan Cirillo's story continued within that framework. A young man serving in a ceremonial role, remembered not only for the way his life ended, but for the life he lived before that moment, and for the way his memory became part of the place he once stood guard.